how on earth did we ever find cryptids and other paranatural beings before we started putting cameras on every street corner and inside everybody's pocket? If for nothing else, I've got to say the surveillance state era has made it way easier to find footage of weird things running around in the dark. Take a look at this extremely creepy footage that we found posted to Reddit. Recorded here is what someone described as a skinwalker caught on camera, and honestly I'm pretty inclined to agree. Let's roll it. Pretty darn creepy, huh? At first glance, you would totally be forgiven for thinking that's a demon or a dog monster. And it's only when you brave up and look through the cracks in your fingers, you're willing to take another look, you realize what you're watching is a human being running by on all fours, like perfectly like an animal. Whoever this is running on all fours better than I run on twos. This is one of the freakiest things I've seen in a good while, and I literally exclusively watch freaky content online all day, every day for my job, so it stands out. This one actually made me like recoil. I've never seen a human being move like that. Well, allegedly a human. That's why we're including it in this video. Could this be a human? Or is this another being altogether? Some powerful shapeshifter caught mid-transformation, dashing through a Walmart parking lot at 2 in the morning? Now, there's not much information to be found about this, but I still did my digging for you just because I care. From what I could garner and gather, the footage was recorded in Mexico a few years back, at the start of 2020, and a few Redditors who were helping me out said that apparently it was a little bit of like a national meme. So if we have any Mexican viewers out there who can confirm or deny this and saw this footage and started laughing, I would love to hear from you about it, because I do want to get to the bottom of one of the weirdest things I've seen in a minute. Prank, hoax, real deal or not, I don't really know about that. But what I can guarantee you is that whatever it is genuinely terrifying. And if you're looking for loads more scary content of shapeshifters or all things paranatural, well, I like to think Top 5 Scary is the #1 place to be. We've got our fingers in a little bit of everything scary on the globe, so click through, find something to shriek at or fall asleep to, I'm not judging. Subscribe and stay scared, but finish this video first before you click away. We got more Skinwalker scares coming up for you. In the clip, we can see a deer getting the heck out of Dodge, scampering out of the woods like somebody just flatlined Bambi's mom. It looks frightened, as if it knows something is up. Well, not even a few seconds after we're introduced to our deer, whatever has this deer so scared that it's causing to freeze up like a deer in headlights, a second deer comes running out with a head that's twisted every wrong way. The thing is checking its rear views while also looking forward. The snarled deer then charges forward into the night, hopefully to never be seen again. Now, when this was uploaded, the intent was that this was a skinwalker caught on camera. Skinwalkers, of course, being Dene or Navajo shamans who have been cast out of society for their practice of black magic and unsavory communion with spirits. They're outcasts from society, exiles. And they're traditionally said to be able to take the form of animals if they wish. They're considered witches, not cryptids, and it should be stated too that indigenous people don't particularly enjoy these stories being repackaged. Now in this clip, it seems to me like this is a deer with a bad neck injury, or maybe a manufacturing defect of some kind, struggling to survive. Now while anything on this big blue marble is possible, to me it's more likely this is just a deer who's probably in extreme pain than it is a shape-shifting witch. Personally, if I could shapeshift, I would shapeshift into a deer that had a regular neck. You let me know what you'd shapeshift into. And if you're looking for more footage of shape-shifting animals, creepy crawlers, ghouls and goblins, ghosts, conspiracies, true crime, fake crime, and a whole lot more, Top 5 Scary has all of that and then some. Seriously, if you can think it up, we've got a video or two on it. So click on through, hit subscribe, please make sure to hit that little bell so you don't miss anything, but if you do me a favor, do that at the end of this video, because I got 4 more weird things found in the woods coming up for you right now. Number 4, friendly neighbor. Our next clip is one that maybe you've seen before if you're like me and spend the days trolling the web for supernatural content, as it's a pretty freaky one. Now there's some skepticism all around this script, you know? I'm naturally a bit of a skeptic. I'm more of a Scully than a Mulder. But this next clip is pure weird. We can see someone or something crawling around in the woods. Now it looks human, but isn't that the whole point, to look deceptively human? Well, whatever this humanoid is, we get an up close and personal look at this thing crawling in an extremely comfortable way that doesn't look human. Humanoid moves like a zombie, moving like a puppet with tangled strings. Now, I would think a shapeshifter, if they got caught by someone, would transform into a wolf or a cougar or maybe a hawk and get on out of there, right? And maybe we're catching this creature at a bad time, mid-transformation, as we see the humanoid attempt to build up a bit of momentum by getting down on all fours and trying to accelerate forward. Now, I do feel like I have to address the elephant in the room here. I don't want to talk down to you or play ignorant. Now, this could be a shape-shifting witch of legend, but we should also address the very real possibility that this clip of someone shirtless walking around on all fours behaving extremely odd in what looks to be a backwoods part of Virginia, maybe. This could very easily be someone on substances, or all of the substances, entirely possible by the way that little walk is going. This looks like there is a cocktail of things going on in that head right now. Whether or not this is a supernatural threat or a chemical one, we might not know, but I think we can all agree, completely horrifying, and I would prefer to never have to interact with that person. Number 3, that ain't no book. And coming in right at our sweet little middle spot, here's a clip that I didn't think was the best, but I also didn't think was the worst. It's a perfectly neutral clip, perfect middle child of a clip. In this very short clip, we see someone driving through the backwoods late at night, real children of the corn kind of situation. Nothing but big stalks for miles and miles around, which is perfect actually, all the better for creatures of the night to stalk you in. That pun was a bit laborious, but we got there. In the clip, it seems like the driver notices a buck acting a bit strangely, until the camera zooms in ever so slightly, and you realize immediately, just like the title said, that ain't no buck. We see a bizarre creature on its hind legs running far, far away from the person filming, which I'm sure the person filming wasn't upset about at all. Now, this creature looks the most like what I think people imagine a skinwalker looks like when they imagine it. Some wretched mix of flesh and animal skin running through the night hunting for prey. I'm actually not sure what this could be. I mean, it could be somebody, again, on some substances running through the woods late at night. A lot of these, I've always got a possibility for what these creatures could be. I like to think I have a reasonable explanation for everything, but this, I don't know. All I can tell you for sure is that ain't no buck. It's an unexplained sighting caught on camera, after all. You want me to try and explain the unexplained? That's the whole purpose of it. They're unexplained. You simply can't explain them. Number 2, the corvid. Coming up next on our list of strange sightings of shape-shifting shamans is this video uploaded to TikTok of a raven that's got people saying, "No more!" Like nevermore, quoth the raven, Edgar Allan Poe. I don't know. Sometimes I'm struggling for jokes. It was uploaded to TikTok by user Lindsay Ivan, and I don't know, something about her, she seems familiar, like I've heard her name before. Anyway, in the video, we get an up-close and beautiful personal view of a beautiful raven with a very unnerving voice. It sounds as if it's got the voice of a human. Now, skinwalkers are said to be shape-shifting witches who can take the form of any animal they please and can mimic many voices. So is that what's happening here? Is that what this footage is? You sure that's why? Well, this next video I wanted to include solely because I wanted to debunk it, 1, and 2, take it as a small window of education for something I am very passionate about. Ravens are corvids, birds that are known for having hooked beaks and bristly feathers. They're usually black, although the blue jay is a very famous notable exception. Crows, ravens, magpies, jackdaws, jays, these are all corvids. Now, what makes corvids so interesting, and one of my favorite kind of birds out there ever, is they are unbelievably intelligent, with many ornithologists suggesting that ravens and crows, not only the smartest birds on the planet, but very well maybe like top 5 smartest animals out there. Among crows and ravens' many parlor tricks is that they're able to remember human faces. They understand the concept of causality. A raven understands what cause and effect is. Ravens can count, they've been shown making tools, they give gifts, they solve puzzles, and they can mimic sounds they hear with alarming clarity like a parrot. Everyone thinks of a parrot as a bird that can talk, but a crow and a raven can do it as well. So this beautiful bird in this clip is showing off his vocal range by mimicking human speech that he'd heard in a wondrous display of intellect from one of nature's most staggeringly impressive creatures. Or, of course, it could be a shape-shifting warlock of Dene legend that is grossly misattributed to almost every single random encounter on TikTok because the name sounds cool and people don't research things. Could be either one. Number 1, a scream in the woods. Coming up in the final spot today in our list of possible shapeshifters we just can't explain on camera is this viral video that's been making the rounds for its unexplained and terrifying nature. Now, this clip was originally uploaded under the name Strange Sounds While Mushroom Hunting. That sounds lovely. By user Tomorrow's Garden. Clicking through on the channel, we can see that they mostly stick to naturalist content, and when they're not doing that, they're reviewing the exciting world of stud finders and mouse traps. So supernatural hoaxes doesn't really seem to be a big part of their channel's identity, which is what makes this clip that much more real. In the clip, we see someone walking around a beautiful little forest as the user is checking out what's new with the local mycelium. Interrupting the bird song and the other beautiful sounds of the forest is a shrill scream that seems like it's come directly from hell, piercing not just your ears but your soul. Downright agonizing. Let's roll a clip of just that shrill shrieking. Pretty scary, right? Sounds like something that has crawled its way out of the depths of the pits of Tartarus and is deeply upset about it. Now, what unnerves me is how much you can maybe this doesn't make sense, hear a human scream inside the animal scream, if you follow me. The best part of this video though is that after the scream peters out, realizing that he's probably now hanging around somewhere where some sort of horrific flesh beast is lingering, he announces to himself very quietly, "I think it's time to go now." He says it so quietly and normally, it's hilarious. Unlike every horror movie guy ever, he just calmly decides to get out, and that's why he survived to upload this video, and Tomorrow's Garden, we thank you for it. Number 4, stray dogs. So for most of these, I found some stories from people on Reddit who claimed that they had experiences with skinwalkers, and all of them are really cool stuff, so I thought I'd share them along with you. Our first one coming up is going to be someone who says this was a family experience they had. This happened to their brother, and I'll paraphrase it ever so slightly for content guidelines, but the story at large is mostly the same. In 2015, my brother worked for a security guard hiring place. I don't really know what you'd call it. Basically, he would call and they would station him someplace or another that needed it. So this particular time, my brother got hired by a local cemetery, as they'd had issues with people sneaking in, going so far as to even break a couple graves. No good? Anyways, his job was to drive around the cemetery and make sure no one was messing around. And this area was pretty rural and had a stray dog problem. Dogs would get lost, or people would abandon them and they would roam the countryside. One night, my brother was stationed at the cemetery and he noticed a big pack of dogs, around 8 or so. He said it was a good assortment, including a tiny little Bichon Frise that had the harness still on and a big old Rottweiler. My brother is driving around real slow and he has the window down when he hears the dogs going wild. And then he hears a sound he described as sounding like that screaming bird from the swamp episode of Avatar: The Last Airbender. Quick little aside, Taylor again. I hope that's a great frame of reference for you guys because I've never seen that show, so I got no idea. Okay, story time again. He says he sees something fast and pale running in front of the headlights and the dogs all start freaking out again. So he follows the dogs in fear that they're going to tear something up. He parks his car and he hears a faint call for help. He shines his light and he sees that the dogs have chased the deer, except the deer was pale, gray, and emaciated. No antlers, and its eyes were completely pitch black. The Rottweiler tried to jump the deer but was thrown off. The creature screeched and then ran into the night on all fours. He never worked for that company again. Bone chiller, eh? What do you guys think? Too good to be true or too true to be good? Number 3, it tried to lure me. Now our next one is a personal recounting from someone who thinks that they might have encountered a creature up close when they were younger. Same deal as before, paraphrased ever so slightly just for timing and content guideline purposes, but otherwise intact and presented to you how it was presented. Every summer, my family and I go up to camp in Ellsworth, Maine, and it's about a 3-hour drive from my house. The camp itself is about an hour from the nearest town. I've been going here my entire life and I've never had something strange like this happen before. I was watching TV in the middle of the night when I heard a noise coming from the kitchen, and I realized that the dogs were going to need to go outside to do their doggy business. So I took them outside. I walked to the front yard and I took the dogs off the leash. It's incredibly dark in the woods in Maine, so I tried to keep my eyes on them. I was momentarily distracted seeing a loon on the lake. When I looked back, I saw that the dogs were looking at something in the woods. I couldn't see what it was, but I just assumed that they'd seen a squirrel or a raccoon. It was then that I realized I didn't see my third dog. She's a small dog and she's completely black. I heard some whimpering, so I stepped out and called out to her again, worried that she got stuck somewhere. Suddenly, I felt something close to me. I looked down and my Alfie was there, I just hadn't seen her. So I started thinking, if Alfie was with me, what was it that I'd heard? The other two dogs began to growl. They were walking towards the blackness of the woods. I picked up Alfie and began to back up when I heard the most absolutely bone-chilling thing I have ever heard in my life. I heard something calling Alfie's name. It sounded like it was trying to mimic me, but it was just wrong. The voice sounded distorted. I ran inside with the dogs, and I have no idea what was in the woods. It's been said that a skinwalker's mimicry doesn't just extend to their ability to change shape, but also to mimic speech. Could this have been a close encounter? How else would someone in the woods know the name of the storyteller's dog? Something to think about, and something to keep you awake all night.
To first understand a creature or a concept, perhaps our first port of call should be the etymology behind it. The definition of the term Wendigo is a key part of the oral traditions of the indigenous people of North America, and well, that's where we first find our first problem, because as we will quickly find, there are many different ways to portray the word Wendigo. In the Ojibwe language, it is the Wendigo. In the language of the Algonquin people, it is Wajigo. In the Cree, it is the Wikitau. And in the Proto-Algonquin of the Algic, it is We Nakato Wa, which most likely translated to owl in their original language. And this is where it is difficult to pinpoint the exact origin of the concept, or whether there even was an origin point, and the Wendigo instead emerged into the psyche of the indigenous people of North America through a shared sense of moral obligation, or even stranger still, the same shared experiences. That though is pure speculation, but interestingly enough, there is a similar word, the Wachuge, that depicts a similar being that appears in the legends of the Athabascan people of the Northwest Pacific coast. You see, much like the Wendigo, the Wachuge is a man-eating creature that devours flesh as a curse and eternal punishment. But interestingly, the Wachuge of legend is instead inexplicably tied to the creation mythos of a specific group of Athabascan people, the Danijah, which roughly translate to those who live among the beaver, who believe that in their mythology the Wachuge was a person who would become possessed or overwhelmed by the power of one of the ancient giant spirit animals that form the basis of their oral tradition. In most instances, the Wachuge is depicted as a creature formed of ice and can only be killed by being thrown into a campfire and kept there overnight until it has melted. In some instances, however, this creature is even depicted as having wings, a rare occurrence in the traditions of North American legend and a symbol of great importance. Whichever depiction of the Wendigo myth we take though, one thing is for certain. In the traditional belief systems of the Ojibwe, the Sholto, the Cree, the Naskapi, the Innu, and many other Algonquin-speaking peoples of North America, the Wendigo is far more than just a cautionary tale told to children over a campfire. It is an integral part of their complex belief system, and in most cases it served as a taboo reinforcement, both a reminder and a warning of the hardships faced through winter. No matter which depiction of the myth we pull apart, in each of them the Wendigo is seen as the embodiment of gluttony and greed, particularly in relation to the unbreakable taboo of cannibalism. It is a cultural cornerstone, a warning sign of excess in consumption, and the creature that would later form these warning signs would become the embodiment of that. Now, that is not to say that the depiction of the Wendigo was always the same. In some cases, particularly in regard to Ojibwe and Cree lore, the Wendigo was often described as a giant creature, many times larger than a human being, a differing characteristic that was absent from other Wendigo myths of Algonquin culture. In these legends, whenever a Wendigo would consume another person, it would grow larger in proportion to the meal it had just eaten, preventing it from ever sating its own hunger. It always wanted more, never sated or content with its quarry. That's an important lesson for all of us to learn, I think. But still, this led to the garish and oftentimes terrifying description of this creature that would later become the driving force behind its evolution from the 20th century onwards, particularly when we analyse its depiction in modern horror fiction. As Basil H. Johnson, an Ojibwe teacher and scholar from Ontario, described in his 1995 book The Manitous, the Spirit World of the Ojibwe, the Wendigo was gaunt to the point of emaciation, its desiccated skin pulled tightly over its bones. With its bones pushing out against its skin, its complexion the ash grey of death, and its eyes pushed back deep into their sockets, the Wendigo looked like a gaunt skeleton recently disinterred from the grave. What lips it had were tattered and bloody, unclean and suffering from suppuration of the flesh. The Wendigo gave off a strange and eerie odour of decay and decomposition, of death and corruption. And this is where the modern depiction of the Wendigo gained traction as an entity of horror fiction. The Wendigo is terrifying, a humanoid, supernatural creature that exemplified an eternal hunger. And as European settlers made their way through North America and the colonial period of the continent began to tighten its grip around this ancient culture, the modern interpretation of the Wendigo was born. And not only that, but as science and psychology came face to face with ancient oral traditions, the exact concept of the Wendigo's cultural purpose became something else entirely. Wendigo psychosis, a historical phenomenon that is perhaps the reason why the Wendigo myth was so successful in later North American literature. In 1661, as a chronicler and missionary for the Jesuit relations made their way through North America, they came across the first documented account of Wendigo psychosis as a result of a reported case of desperation and cannibalism. As he explained, the men that he came across were afflicted with neither lunacy, hypochondria, nor frenzy, but a combination of all of these species of disease, which affects their imaginations and causes them a more than canine hunger. This makes them so ravenous for human flesh that they pounce upon women, children, and even upon men like veritable werewolves and devour them voraciously without being able to appease or glut their appetite, ever seeking fresh prey, and the more greedily, the more they eat. Whatever the interpretation of this report, it was an important moment in the later cultural significance of the Wendigo, particularly with its relation as a genuine concern for the rough and often inhospitable periods in colonial North American history. Now, the Wendigo was far more than just a creature in a far-off land, but instead a very real hardship faced in winter as the inexperienced fur trappers and settlers pushed further into the New World, hearing tales from the indigenous peoples of the land who would grew to fear it over many generations. However, one of the more famous cases of Wendigo psychosis came several hundred years later with the tale of a Plains Cree trapper named Swiftrunner. During the harsh winter of 1878, Swiftrunner and his family were stranded and starving in the wilderness of Saskatchewan. Soon, despite being 25 miles away from an emergency food cache of the Hudson's Bay Company, Swiftrunner's eldest son perished, and shortly afterward, Swiftrunner allegedly butchered and ate his wife and 5 remaining children. The case was both strange and shocking, and given that the Plains Cree trapper resorted to cannibalism in such close proximity to the emergency cache, it was later revealed that Swiftrunner's actions were not the case of pure cannibalism as a dark and last resort to starvation, but rather of a man afflicted by Wendigo psychosis. And here was the inspiration for the first and very important fictional interpretation of the Wendigo myth, with a short story written by Algernon Blackwood, a tale written in the year 1910 simply titled The Wendigo, the first mainstream horror depiction of its kind. In the story, Blackwood tells the tale of 2 Scotsmen on a moose hunting trip in the wilderness of Rat Portage in northwest Ontario. They are joined on their trip by 2 guides, a man named Hank Davis and the French Canuck Joseph Defargo, alongside their native cook, a man named Punk. Although this tale is a very tame brush with the Wendigo myth of legend compared to most modern incarnations, it instead employed the first depiction of the Wendigo not just as a grotesque entity, but instead as a doppelganger which could take on the guise of a human being. Perhaps the most important convention of this story, though, is with the wisdom of the native character Punk, who recognizes all of the signs of the Wendigo and immediately gets the hell out of camp. Whatever its importance to the mainstream horror depiction of the Wendigo, Algernon Blackwood's story planted the seed of an idea in many other horror writers of the time. It would influence authors such as Howard Phillips Lovecraft and Grace Isabel Colburn, and most importantly, Auguste Derleth, who would use the concept of the Wendigo in his story, The Thing That Walked on the Wind, and later with his Cthulhu mythos entity, Ithaqua, which some of you may be familiar with. Hint, it's a giant Wendigo-looking ice revenant that roams the Arctic wastes. Sound familiar? Yeah. It would also go on to inspire an early short story of Thomas Pynchon's titled Mortality and Mercy in Vienna, first published in 1959. Here it focused on a character developing Wendigo psychosis and his development then into a psychotic serial killer. That in itself would later inspire several movies such as 1999's Ravenous, as well as several TV series such as Charmed and more recently Hannibal. Perhaps the most iconic of the modern Wendigo, though, is with Stephen King's version of the entity. As we briefly explained in our opening clip, it would inspire a key character in King's 1983 novel Pet Sematary, where the personification of evil in an ancient burial ground of the Micmac people was an ugly, grinning creature with yellow-grey eyes, its ears replaced by ram's horns, and its tongue pointed, decaying, and yellowed. Although not as profound as it is now, at the time, King's interpretation of the Wendigo, which in turn was an interpretation of the 19th century colonial legends coming from North America, set the template for the Wendigo's later portrayal in popular horror culture, where for the most part it completely replaced the Native American lore that had long formed the importance of the Wendigo. In 2012 though, Chippewa author Louise Erdrich had a thing or two to say about that with a novel The Roundhouse, setting the precedent for the new reinterpretation of the Wendigo myth. And here is where our path splits, because the Wendigo in many ways explains the transformation of one land to the other. For thousands of years the Wendigo served as a cultural barometer for the Algonquian people, an ever-adapting tale that formed the importance of cooperation, of restraint, of sustainability, and the dangers that came with forsaking those virtues. It painted the monster that we all ran the risk of becoming if we indulged too much in the act of greed. You see, as colonial North America expanded into these ancient territories and these settlers shifted away from the many European folktales that had formed the basis of their society, new ones were forged, fragments of a culture that had long existed before them as they clambered to produce some sort of an identity. Whilst this identity has been interpreted in many differing ways, perhaps in most cases to their detriment, the essence behind the myth of the Wendigo has always remained the same. Be it man or monster, we all choose which side we fall on.
Coming in number 5, we've got the Stalker Challenge. Right on, you might hear that name and think it's one thing, but it's actually probably not the first conclusion your mind lands upon. The Stalker Challenge isn't about following someone around or testing a pal's skills at going unnoticed in the dark. It's actually a reference to a popular PC game called Stalker, where players explore an alternate reality Chernobyl exclusion zone. A lot of folks praise it for its lonesome and isolated atmosphere and the more realistic gunplay. Plenty of online military enthusiasts, survivalists, and Tarkovsky fans enjoy the game, so when we say that this Wendigo sighting was a result of the Stalker Challenge, we can probably assume the writer was a fan of Stalker and wanted to experience living life solo in the wastelands for a while. During this temporary hermitage, he worked his way into the middle of nowhere with nothing but some vodka, guns, and a harmonica. Like a true survivalist, he hunted some small game, made a meal of it, and explored the surrounding area. Snacking on the rabbit he'd hunted, he heard some rustling coming from the bushes, but didn't think anything of it. The next day, he was startled awake by some screaming. Weird, especially considering how far he was from civilization. Grabbing his rifle, he went off in the direction of the scream. It didn't seem to come from one singular location, and eventually the writer got lost. After a long day wandering around, he found his way back to the camp he'd set up, but now somebody else was there. There was a humanoid form in tattered clothes staring down at his fire pit, unmoving. Worried that this person might be injured, the writer called out to him. No response. After a few minutes of standing there staring at him, he again asked if he was alright. The humanoid figure turned to him and said, "I wouldn't worry about it." This set off alarm bells for the writer, who began to back away. At that point, the humanoid mentioned that he could go for another meal right now, prompting the writer to book it out of there. Hearing the humanoid running behind him, he turned around and shot blindly, apparently finding his mark. The creature screamed, the same scream from earlier, and seemingly disappeared. The writer eventually made it to the road and encountered a car. He didn't look back. Coming in at number 4, we've got the Nebraskan Wendigo. If you weren't already wary of traveling alone in Nebraska, now you've got a whole new reason. That's right, a new spooky story of someone's close encounter with a third kind. Maybe not an alien, but hey. This tale comes from a guy who was a farmhand when he was younger. One night, the farmer he worked for asked if he could figure out who was trampling all the corn stalks at night. Excited to take on guard duty, the farmhand stayed up to see if he could catch the culprit. Armed with the farmer's shotgun and the advice not to shoot unless absolutely necessary, he hung out in a lawn chair and walked around the field a few times. Eventually, he heard rustling from within the cornfield, followed by what sounded like giggling children. This, of course, was the most unsettling moment of the farmhand's entire life. Not wanting to hurt kids, but also not wanting to get children of the corned, he brandished his gun and told them to leave unless they were looking for trouble. The giggling stopped and the rest of the night went smoothly. However, the next morning, the farmer discovered something a little more disturbing than trampled corn. His cow, which had been left in the barn, was totally exsanguinated. All the blood in this animal was removed somehow and didn't leave any on the floors. The farmer called the cops and somehow managed to land on the explanation that it was some idiot kids, but the farmhand didn't quite buy that. However, the following night, both the farmer and the farmhand stayed up to see if they could find anyone. The farmhand, sitting in his chair again, heard the giggling once more. This time he asked whoever it was to reveal himself, prompting a gigantic humanoid creature with antlers to shuffle out of the field. Bad call, to be honest. The farmhand shot at the beast and began to run away. During his flight, he was tripped by a gopher hole and fell to the ground hard. Suddenly it was morning and the farmhand was back inside the house, surrounded by the farmer's family. The farmer had told the cops that he was attacked by some random guy, but he chased him off. However, afterwards, the farmer took the farmhand aside and told him that he saw the beast too. It was on all fours after the boy tripped, and it took 6 shots from his rifle to scare it off. From then on, they didn't go out after dusk, and they kept guns on them at all times around the farm.
Coming in at number 3 on this list is the Wendigos from Fallout 76. Fallout 76 is another installment in the Fallout series, which for the most part has gotten excellent reviews. Although many thought that this video game as a whole did not meet the standards of the previous Fallout games, they definitely nailed it with their adaptation of the Wendigo. The Wendigo in Fallout 76 is a very fast and strong enemy that can be found in various locations around the map. Unlike the previous 2 video games mentioned, there are multiple Wendigos that the player has to deal with. Sticking to the folklore, the purpose of this enemy is to eat the player, and if you aren't careful or properly armed, they will succeed. What is different about Fallout 76 is that these creatures have different variations to them. The Ravenous Wendigo, the Glowing Wendigo, and the Scorched Wendigo can all be found throughout this game. The designation of what type of Wendigo they are is determined by environment or where the player is in the game. The image of the Wendigo changes slightly depending on what type of subspecies it falls under. However, they all have some general characteristics. They kind of look like a bigger and stronger golem from Lord of the Rings. The difference here is that rather than want to have the one ring of power, they just want to kill you and eat your flesh. Especially the ravenous ones. I mean, it's literally in their name. They are ravenous, so I can only assume that these Wendigos are pretty hungry. Coming in at number 2 is Seeking Evil the Wendigo. Seeking Evil the Wendigo is a PC game that came out in 2017 that is very similar to the likes of Slenderman. Deep in the dark forests of North America, your character wakes up in the night left stranded for dead. As if waking up disoriented in the woods wasn't enough, well, these aren't ordinary North American forests. This is the hunting ground of the Wendigo. The main mission in this game is to survive the likes of this demonic super predator. Problem is, this thing is quick. It's really quick. Quicker than your character. Like every video game, as you progress, it gets harder and harder, meaning the Wendigo gets tougher to avoid. This video game isn't like the other video games. You can't just brute force your way through it. To get rid of the curse of the Wendigo, you have to find and light totem poles that are scattered throughout the forest. Every time you light a totem pole though, this creature from hell gets faster, stronger, and more importantly, hungrier. It's said that this game requires a lot of thinking instead of the initial run from point A to point B strategy, which is a bit of a problem for me because if I'm getting chased by one of these legendary blood fiends, I'd probably be running for my life. Number 1 on this list is the Wendigos from Until Dawn. Until Dawn is a critically acclaimed PlayStation 4 video game released in 2015. What makes this game so unique is that the player can control 8 different characters. The game utilizes a butterfly effect technique where the player may make a decision as one of the characters that can then affect all of the other characters and alter the entire story. This video game often appears on other lists of the scariest video games of all time, and for good reason. The 8 players are trapped on Blackwood Mountain and they have to survive an onslaught of Wendigos. Rather than have one demonic Wendigo, this video game goes in the direction of having multiple enemies. These Wendigos also stray from the classic image of a moose humanoid-esque creature and are humans that have just mutated into cannibalistic demons due to being possessed by the Wendigo spirit. I'm not gonna lie, the graphics of these Wendigos are very unsettling. They took what Fallout 76 did and they just went way scarier with it. The Wendigos appear as these white skinny mutated beings with extremely sharp teeth and a deep desire to eat you. What brings this video game to another level to me is just how real the story gets. Without giving too much away, one of the main Wendigos was just another character that the player gets to know and that went missing a year earlier. The image of having a family member or a friend disappear and then show up a year later looking like one of those things and trying to eat me is not a happy thought. The backstory of how the Wendigos got to this mountain is also extremely creepy. It's said that in a nearby mine, the miners got trapped and had to resort to eating one another to survive. The first of these Wendigos would have been these trapped miners from years prior who ate their friends to survive. Yeah. It gets pretty dark, guys. Remind me to never go camping again, my friends.
In The Pack, written by Paul Hinton and released back in 2013, werewolves, although still depicted in their traditional form, kind of are an entirely different force of nature. If you'd like an idea as to the bones of this novel, picture 30 Days of Night but put werewolves in it and then stick it in a small town in England. The Pack tells a tale of a fictional town called Whitchurch tucked in the idyllic landscape of rural England. However, in this little town it has a very bizarre history soaked in blood and the misfortune of an ancient curse. You see, every 15 years a vicious pack of werewolves that are genuinely terrifying in parts, may I add, are unleashed upon Whitchurch to feast upon the locals. And yeah, as you may imagine, that's exactly how this novel kicks off. Listen, I can't exactly heap a huge amount of praise on the actual technical construction of this novel because for the most part Hinton's style is incredibly simplistic and the dialogue heavy nature of the novel is dragging in parts, but honestly, the werewolves in this novel are awesome and it's worthwhile just to experience that. They're unlike pretty much every other werewolf in literature. They're like a force of nature, more akin to the vampires of 30 Days of Night than anything else. Also, if you enjoyed Neil Marshall's awesome movie Dog Soldiers, then you will adore this book. It's got the same British charm to it and a similar set of true grit characters. Yeah, The Pack. It's worth a read. Swinging in at number 4, Reverend Lowe, The Cycle of the Werewolf. And yeah, we can't really make this list without giving reference to the main man himself, Stephen King. You see, out of all of the entries on this list, Stephen King's The Cycle of the Werewolf is perhaps the most traditional depiction of lycanthropy. And yeah, I'm not entirely sure how he does it because much like with the vampires in Salem's Lot, King manages to turn such a traditional horror trope into a completely different vessel for fear. But hey, I guess that's why he's the king of horror, right? For those of you that haven't yet read The Cycle of the Werewolf, please do. It's a fantastic read. It's short enough to get through in a single sitting, and conceptually speaking, it's the definition of what being a werewolf is. Also, yes, this is the King novel that 1985's Silver Bullet starring Corey Haim was based upon, so if it seems familiar, that's why. Written by Stephen King and illustrated by Bernie Ritson, The Cycle of the Werewolf is told across 12 chapters, each of them depicting a month of the calendar in the small town of Tarker's Mills, Maine. The story is told through the eyes of a 10-year-old boy, Marty Coslaw, who is paraplegic and wheelchair bound, and also the only one in his town who knows that a ravenous werewolf is murdering people every full moon. It doesn't take him long to realise that the werewolf is none other than Reverend Lester Lowe, the town's priest, although he himself isn't exactly aware. The thing is, the story is actually really sad, and King manages to walk a fine line between the bestial rage of the werewolf and the tragic realization of Reverend Lowe's curse. The origin of his lycanthropy is never fully explained, and that serves to hammer home the tragedy of his affliction, juxtaposed by the genuinely gut-wrenching physicalities of his killing spree. Yeah. This one is Werewolf 101. Next up at number 3, the lupine theriomorph, the Dresden Files. And yeah, something that isn't Werewolf 101 at all, because who better to completely reinvent the werewolf on several different levels than Jim Butcher himself. Now listen, you may be aware that we're big fans of the Dresden Files over here at Top 5 Scary Videos, but if you know, then you know, because the theriomorphs of the Dresden Files are awesome. And also, we have to hammer down the specifics here because there's quite a few versions of the traditional werewolf as far as Butcher is concerned, much like with his varying depictions of vampires, as is the case with the Four Courts. In the world of Harry Dresden, there are several types of werewolf, otherwise known as lupine theriomorphs. There are the classic werewolves, which function exactly as they do in Gothic literature, terrible magic curse. You get the drift. But then there are the Hexen wolves, a type of lichen magic that allows a person to transform into a wolf-like beast through the use of a magical talisman imbued by another user. To transform, a person makes use of a talisman which can be worn and activated, and then, yeah, instant werewolf, or FBI werewolf. Usually it's a wolf hide bat, which are a pretty important resource in the world of Harry Dresden. Then there are the loup-garous, which are also incredibly similar to the classic werewolves, but instead are created by a much more powerful type of magic and are reliant on the old adage of the silver bullet variety. The loup-garous are essentially the resulting creation if you make enemies with really powerful sorcerers. And then there are the lycanthropes, which are essentially the anamorphic feather in Butcher's werewolf cap. As depicted in Full Moon, lycanthropes are not created but born, and for all intents and purposes are perhaps the most powerful lycans in the series. However, we're irking on spoilers here, but there are a few more versions of things in Butcher's series, which, you know, is reason enough to give it a read. Coming in at number 2, the Wolfen, Warhammer 40k. Okay guys, talk about diverging from the path of classic werewolfism. Of course it had to be the staggering canon of the grim darkness of Warhammer 40k to deliver us a completely insane depiction of the stereotypical werewolf. itself. Because what happens when you cross an ancient race of lycan men with a space marine? Yeah. The Wolfen, that's exactly what you get. And if you know anything about the vast lore behind Warhammer 40k, you'll know that these guys are one of the most savage and frighteningly efficient fighting forces in the whole of the Space Marines. And also the creation of the Wolfen is something else entirely, so much so I'm pretty sure there is nothing else like it in werewolf fiction. Although it is kind of close to the Trial of the Grasses in the Witcher series, which is pretty cool actually, and another reason to read The Witcher. As described in texts of the Terran Empire, the Wolfen are members of the Space Wolves chapter who have succumbed to the curse of the Wolfen and thus transformed into savage, malformed lupine mutants. Genetically engineered creations within every Space Wolf's gene seed is a specific genetic sequence known as the Canis helix, which unleashes the acute predatory sense of a race of creatures known as Fenrisian wolves, the native species of the Wolfen's homeworld, Fenris. Yeah, exactly, because how do you get an entire army of genetically engineered and technologically superior werewolf soldiers in the Warhammer universe? You create an entire planet of them. Now obviously if you're familiar with the series, you'll know that the Space Wolves are an incredibly powerful sect of Space Marines and by extension a critical arm of the Empire, but in this case Space Wolves is very much indeed taken literally. Space werewolves. There we have it. And finally coming in at number 1 spot, Karkaroth, the Silmarillion. Because yes, there is one werewolf that all others tremble at the very mention of, and surprisingly enough, it comes from an incredibly well-known series that isn't exactly renowned for its depiction of gothic horror tropes. J.R.R. Tolkien's legendary work of fantasy, The Lord of the Rings, was built upon by a very important side compendium, his 1977 posthumous novel, The Silmarillion, and we have that to thank for fully fleshing out Tolkien's world of Arda and the incredibly rich and in-depth lore of the First and Second Ages. In many ways, The Silmarillion is considered to be the Prose Edda or the Bible of the Lord of the Rings, and any such creation story in turn needs to have its villain. That villain is a figure known as Morgoth, the progenitor of all evil in Arda, and the one responsible for creating some of the most vile evils in the whole of Middle-earth. One of those is Ungoliant, the giant spider and mother of Shelob, and the other is Draugluin, the first of the werewolves. But in this case, they both pale in comparison to the power of Karkaroth, offspring of Draugluin and the greatest and most powerful werewolf to have ever lived. Otherwise known as the Red Maw and the Jaws of Thirst, his eyes burn like red coals and his teeth were poisoned as the spears of the Orcish legions. He was reared by Morgoth as a line of defense against Huan, the white wolfhound of the Valar, and was charged with defending the Gate of Angband, where he eventually went on a madness-induced warpath, slaying everything and anything that stood in his path. You see, the thing is, although Tolkien's depiction of werewolves aren't exactly in line with many of the other mechanics of the creatures, they are the literal definition of the primal rage and bestial wrath that werewolves represent. These werewolves aren't trapped men, but instead they're servants of evil itself, bred by Morgoth from wolves and then inhabited by spirits of pure evil. And Karkaroth, yeah, he's the baddest of them all.
In at number 5, The Wolfman. Directed by George Wagner and released in 1941, The Wolfman is a horror film starring Lon Chaney Jr. in the title role. After Larry purchases a silver-headed walking stick that represents a werewolf, he is attacked by a creature of folklore. He then transforms into a wolf every full moon and hunts for prey. Now, unlike the rest of our list, that is one of the more classic depictions of werewolves on our list. However, it was also the first of its kind to do it. The movie set the standard for werewolf movies, even introducing the concept that werewolves are vulnerable to silver and are marked with a pentagram. A chilling poem is even repeated throughout the movie. I quote, "Even a man who is pure in heart and says his prayers by night may become a wolf when the wolfbane blooms and the autumn moons is bright." The poem, contrary to popular belief, was not an ancient legend, but in fact an invention of screenwriter Seod Mack, with it being repeated in every subsequent film in which the Wolfman appears. The movie currently holds a 90% approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes, with the general consensus reading, "A handsomely told tale with an affecting performance from Lon Chaney Jr." The Wolfman remains one of the classics of the Universal horror stable. In at number 4, we have Dog Soldiers. Directed by Neil Marshall in his directorial debut and released in 2002, Dog Soldiers is a horror movie starring Sean Pertwee, Kevin McKidd, and Liam Cunningham. During a routine nighttime training mission in the Scottish Highlands, a small squad of British soldiers expected to rendezvous with the Special Ops unit instead find a bloody massacre with a sole survivor. The savage attackers of the Special Ops team return, and the men are rescued by Megan, a zoologist who identifies what hunts them as werewolves. Without transport or communication, the group is forced to retreat to a farmhouse to wait for the full moon to disappear at dawn. Dog Soldiers has been called a mix between Jaws, Aliens and Predator with a werewolf twist, and who doesn't want that? The movie has a lot of tongue-in-cheek humor, however, the domineering creature design makes Dog Soldiers one of the creepiest and most entertaining werewolf movies of all time. The movie currently holds a 77% approval rating, with the general consensus reading: frightening, funny and packed with action, Dog Soldiers is well worth checking out for genre fans, and marks writer-director Neil Marshall as a talent to keep an eye on, and kept an eye on we did, with Marshall going on to direct The Descent, Doomsday, Hellboy and The Reckoning. In at number 3 we have Underworld. Directed by Len Wiseman and released in 2003, Underworld is an action horror film that centers on the secret history of vampires and lycans, an abbreviated form of lycanthropy which means werewolf. The plot revolves around Celine, played by Kate Beckinsale, a vampire death dealer hunting lycans. She finds herself attracted to a human, Michael Corvin, who is being targeted by the lycans. After Michael is bitten by one of them, Celine must decide whether to do her duty and kill him, or go against her clan and save him. Underworld is unexpectedly a Romeo and Juliet tale set amid a war between vampires and werewolves, breaking all the rules in the process. Not to mention, the movie relies on practical effects and less on computer-generated imagery. On top of that, it also has one of the most intimidating werewolf designs in movie history. Now, as a whole, the movie and its subsequent sequels aren't the best, but it's certainly changed all the rules of the werewolf genre. As of right now, it holds a 31% approval rating, with the general consensus reading: though stylish to look at, Underworld is tedious and derivative. Roger Ebert went on to state that this is a movie so paltry in its characters and shallow in its story that the worm seems to exist primarily to provide graphic visuals. I'm guessing he wasn't a fan. That doesn't surprise me in the slightest, because I wasn't either. Coming in at number 2, An American Werewolf in London. Directed by John Landis and released back in 1981, An American Werewolf in London is a horror comedy film starring David Norton, Jennifer Agutter and Griffin Dunn. The plot follows two American backpackers, David and Jack, who are attacked by a creature while traveling to England, causing David to question whether he will become a werewolf under the next full moon. Now, despite the movie's comedic undertones, it's a groundbreaking, grisly masterpiece with chilling special effects and a transformation scene that lingers with you long after the credits roll. An American Werewolf in London has garnered an 87% approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes, with the general consensus reading: terrifying and funny in almost equal measure. John Landis' horror comedy crosses genres while introducing Rick Baker's astounding makeup effects. However, surprisingly, Roger Ebert's review was less favourable, with him stating, An American Werewolf in London seems curiously unfinished, as if director John Landis spent all his energy on spectacular set pieces and then didn't want to bother with things like transitions, character development, or an ending. Straight savagery. Despite that, An American Werewolf in London is chiefly appreciated as a milestone in the comedy horror genre and for its innovative makeup effects, with the Daily Telegraph stating that it was the first mainstream hit which managed to make its gross out effects simultaneously shocking and hilarious, and called the signature werewolf transformation scene stunningly ingenious without a computer effect in sight, but also suffused with squirm-inducing agony. And finally, in at number 1 we have Ginger Snaps. Directed by John Fawcett and released back in 2000, Ginger Snaps stars Emily Perkins and Catherine Isabel, two teenage sisters who have a fascination with death. The plot concerns two outcast sisters, Ginger and Bridget, in the mindless suburban town of Bailey Downs. On the night of Ginger's first period, she is savagely attacked by a wild creature. Ginger's wounds miraculously heal, but something's not quite right. Now Bridget must save her sister and save herself. The movie smartly parallels lycanthropy with puberty, something that has never been seen before on screen, with the teenagers finding themselves growing apart once Ginger begins undergoing unusual changes. Film garnered an 89% approval rating, with the general consensus reading: the strong female cast and biting satire of teenage life making Ginger Snaps far more memorable than your average werewolf movie or teen flick. And that's the point, this movie is far from your average werewolf movie, with it showcasing the pains of puberty and the bond between two sisters. The movie is darkly humorous that builds to a gut punch of an ending, with Bridget being forced to try and save her sister from her now monstrous identity.
One particular wolfman with a few daddy issues, illustrating the archetypal mysticism and many taboos that evidently come with being a lycanthrope, particularly if you're a 19th century aristocrat in Victorian London. And as some of you may know, The Wolfman is a near-direct remake of 1941's The Wolf Man, starring Lon Chaney Jr. as the titular beast man in question, which is widely considered to be the most recognisable and most cherished original version of the werewolf myth ever created on film. And whilst it's certainly wasn't the first, it's one of the best, and it gave popular rise to what we now consider to be werewolf horror cinema, cementing other actors such as the legendary Paul Naschy, Henry Hull, Oliver Reed, Jack Nicholson, and David Norton in their iconic lycanthropic roles. But first, before we give credit to the hallmarks of horror cinema that the image of the werewolf has become, let's first begin where all things should. Etymology. After all, what's in a word? As you may imagine, the word werewolf comes from the Old English compound of were, meaning man, and wolf, meaning, well, wolf. Now, although this is certainly the clearest definitive origin of the term, there are other far older origins of similar sorts of terms. Low Latin describes the gerulphus, which the French later misheard as garou, which means beware, harking back to their description of the iconic loup-garou, a wolf to be aware of. But it's older than that still, and although the Norman Frankish described the werewolf, Old Norse describes the varulf, or in much rarer terms the ulfhedin, one in wolfskin. In modern Scandinavian there is even the kveldulf, the evening wolf, considered to be derived from the name of the legendary Kvedulf Bjalfason, a historical Norse berserker from the 9th century. However, the actual term lycanthropy comes from an ancient Greek term as a compound of leukos, meaning wolf, and anthropos, meaning human. Although the term doesn't appear until late antiquity, it is derived from a far more ancient one, therianthropy, the mythological act of metamorphosis and shapeshifting from a human to an animal that is as old as ancient Egyptian mythology, appearing in the mythos of myriad African and Eurasian cultures and folklore, from ancient Mesoamerica to the Kingdom of China. As it seems, the act of transforming from a human being to a primal creature has played an integral part in the methods of our ancient oral and recorded traditions. And here is where things get interesting, because although the origins of the term werewolf are ancient indeed, the archetypal European concept of the werewolf emerges from a very clear source, that being the ferociously feared warrior classes of the ancient Germanic tribes, many of whom revered the wolf as a potent symbol of both hunter and fighter. You see, the transformation from men into wolves was a wide held belief throughout Iron Age Europe, particularly in the Germanic sphere, often highlighted in their belief of Tierkrieger, also known as Woden or Odin in Norse, the leader of the wild hunt himself. Interestingly enough, it has also been noted that the metaphorical image of the widespread belief of wolf men in ancient Europe and the wider Indo-European sphere is directly correlated to the tribal transition of Europeans moving from fruit gathering to predatory hunting during the Iron Age, a forgotten cultural practice that was revered by ancient pagan European society. In 440 BC, the ancient Greek historian Herodotus, in his histories, described the Nuri, a tribe which he placed in the northeast of Scythia, where all of its members transformed into wolves once every year for several days, where they roamed the wild before changing back to their human forms. Now, in all likelihood, this was a tribe that is now part of Russia, and the tribespeople of the Nuri were most certainly using wolf skins and pelts for warmth during winter, but still, the metaphor is what's important here. Similarly, in the 2nd century BC, the Greek geographer Pausanias described the story of Lycaon, the king of Arcadia, who was transformed into a wolf following his ritualistic murder of a child. Lycaon's transformation was bestowed upon by Zeus after his attempt to serve him human flesh to discover if he truly was a god, depicting cannibalism and murder as a grave taboo, and the result being this primal, torturous prison. As written by Ovid in his Metamorphosis, describing the transformation of King Lycaon, he tried to speak, but his voice broke into an echoing howl. His ravening soul infected his jaws, his murderous longings were turned on the cattle, he still was possessed by bloodlust. His garments were changed to a shaggy coat and his arms into legs. He was now transformed into a wolf. However, although numerous are these references to man transforming to wolf in ancient literature, it is older than even that. You see, the first ever allusion to a man transforming into a wolf astoundingly dates back to the oldest surviving great work of literature in human history, the Epic of Gilgamesh, dating back to the 3rd dynasty of Ur, roughly around 2100 BC. Lycanthropy, as it seems, is a tale as old as time. But why? What is it of these monsters to men? What is this morbid fascination that many of our cultures have held with the act of this primalistic transformation? Inexplicably, as ancient history has often suggested, suggested it occurred with the debasement of the human moral spirit, succumbing to the bloodthirsty primal urges of a violent act, murder, cannibalism, the sight of a frightful massacre, not in any sense of the martial or the art of war, because as we know the ancient world certainly enjoyed a battle or two, but in the actions outside of what was considered moralistically sound of the time. And perhaps here is where the werewolf tale begins to take on its far more human sensibility. You see, the werewolf is a bizarre construct. It comes from a cultural function of damning, violent and bloodthirsty actions, but as Europe wrestled itself from the grip of the Roman Empire, the cultural myth of the werewolf seemed to expand into the role of almost a guardian of sorts, albeit one that was primed for feasting on human flesh. You see, the Germanic pagan traditions that we previously spoke of persisted longest throughout the Scandinavian Viking Age. King Harald Fairhair of Norway was said to have commanded his troop of Ulfhednar, often mentioned throughout the Volsunga saga, fearsome berserkers who wore the skins of wolves to channel the spirits of these ferocious animals to enhance their effectiveness in battle. This was continued in the traditional period of the Kievan Rus, a loose confederation of Slavic and Finnic peoples of Europe throughout the 9th to the mid 13th century, which would form the legendary Slavic mythology of the werewolf, one that is far different from the medieval depiction of the lycan. Historically speaking, the legendary 11th century Belarusian prince Vleslav of Polotsk was very openly considered to have been a werewolf, reportedly capable of moving at superhuman speeds and proudly documented in the 12th century text, The Tale of Igor's Campaign. Here it was stated that Vleslav the prince judged men. As prince he ruled towns, but at night he prowled in the guise of a wolf. From Kiev prowling he reached before the cock's crew, Tumtakaran, the path of great sun. As a wolf prowling he crossed. For him in Polotsk they rang for matins early, at St. Sophia the bells, but he heard the ringing in Kiev. And so this is where we come to our most accurate understanding of the werewolf in modern horror fiction, one that was proliferated in the many tales that occurred throughout the dawn of medieval Europe. Burchard of Worms of the Holy Roman Empire spoke of werewolves that roamed the countryside murdering folk in their sleep. Later, Liutprand of Cremona allegedly spread a rumour that Prince Bahan, the only son of King Simeon of Bulgaria, could use his debased magic to transform into a wolf at will. On the other hand, in Marie de France's poem Bisclaveret, written in the year 1200, she describes a nobleman, Bizunet, who was cursed to transform into a wolf once every week. However, when his treacherous wife had stolen his clothing needed to restore his human form, he escaped the king's wolf hunt by imploring the king for mercy, and then as an act of penance accompanied the king as his own werewolf bodyguard. That's pretty damn interesting, right? Perhaps the Slavic traditions were rubbing off on them. You see, this is the beginning of the very clear duality now found of the werewolf in horror literature. On one hand, the Slavic reverence held for the lycan as depicted through the ancient pagan traditions of Iron Age Europe, one that is not a werewolf in the same sense but a vlodglak, a wolfskin, which would later become associated with the concept of the revenant, the vampire, which is a hero to some and evil to others. But then on the other hand, we have the Germanic werewolf, or more importantly, the medieval werewolf, widely associated with the witchcraft panic beginning roughly around 1400 AD, a period of folklore history that hit its fever pitch in 16th century France and Germany. You see, here there were countless reports of werewolf attacks, hundreds of them in fact, court trials clearly recorded in history, and in some fewer cases clearly found evidence against the accused lycan of both murder and cannibalism, which interestingly enough harkens back to the same fear that we found in the ancient Greek depictions of lycanthropy. Hey, I'm not saying that there's a direct correlation between the Holy Roman Empire and the medieval werewolf, but it's certainly interesting, and also it is. Accusations of lycanthropy were frequent in the Valais witch trials of 1428. In the canton of Vaud, which borders the cantons of Fribourg and Bern, numerous child-eating werewolves were reported through the year 1448. In 1598 in Anjou, a gang of werewolves were sighted roaming the rivers of the French lowlands, and in 1603 in Bordeaux, a teenage werewolf was sentenced to life imprisonment for the crimes of lycanthropy. Perhaps the most famous case of the medieval werewolf, though, came to the forefront with the bloodthirsty tale of Peter Stump, a German farmer and alleged cannibalistic serial killer reported to have murdered and eaten over 18 victims, including 14 children and 2 pregnant women, after the devil himself had allegedly given him a werewolf girdle of black magic which bestowed upon him the all-consuming power and hunger of a wolf. Peter Stump, otherwise known as the werewolf of Bedburg, is perhaps the root form of what we now consider to be the classic werewolf of horror literature and cinema, but interestingly enough, it is one that focuses exclusively on the violent and bloodthirsty nature of a man who is caught physically or metaphorically transforming into a beast. Interestingly enough though, more often than not, the modern werewolf has often become a sort of hybrid of these two dualistic components of the ancient lycan, the conventions of which are just as much of a hodgepodge as its forebears were. Take for example the folklore depiction of silver being a repellent to a werewolf. You see, silver in folklore, particularly in Celtic folklore, is a very important trope, but as to where it came about in relation to lycanthropy is anyone's guess. In 1640, as folklore tradition describes, the city of Greifswald in Germany was infested by a pack of werewolves, and as was written, a clever lad suggested that they gather all their silver buttons, goblets, belt buckles and so forth, and then melt them down into bullets for their muskets and pistols. This time it worked, and they slaughtered the creatures and rid Greifswald of the lycanthropes. You see, in many ways the fiction of the werewolf is a constant work in progress, constantly grabbing different components of folklore, superstition, mysticism and religion and piling it atop the wolfskin legend. In that regard, the werewolf is perhaps the most forward-thinking horror convention ever known. In The White Wolf of the Harz Mountains, a short story appearing in the Phantom Ship written in 1839 by Frederick Marryat, the first ever demonic femme fatale was penned, one that this time transformed itself from woman into wolf. This trope would occur sparingly throughout Gothic literature, but after the 1970s, particularly following Angela Carter's The Bloody Chamber and her short story The Company of Wolves written in 1979, the female lycanthrope changed the game once more, culminating in Ginger Snaps, released in the year 2000, which is freaking awesome, and then again with 2011's Red Riding Hood, which isn't great, but it highlights my point, taking these themes and then applying the transformation of lycanthropy to that of sexuality and a transgressive discovery of the South, highlighting the liberation that comes from championing the natural form. And again here, the concept of the werewolf in culture has often been used to highlight a sort of social movement of sorts, be it one that is taboo like the werewolf of medieval Europe, describing the fears of serial killers and cannibalistic monsters, or the satanic panic of witchcraft by the Holy Roman Empire, or on the other hand, one of a cultural advocacy and guardianship like that of the Slavic werewolf, who harnessed the more primal urges of the human form to their advantage, often as a force for good in defense of their own tribe or people. You see, be it monster or man, so it seems that the duality of the werewolf has long lingered in the hearts of humanity for thousands of years, and will perhaps linger for thousands of years more. After all, aren't we just wild animals howling at the moon? Kicking off at number 5, The Wolfman, 2010. And it kind of makes me sad, because I'm torn in two by this movie, much like the human victims of the titular Wolfman, or Wolfmen in this case. You see, this film had so much potential to be brilliant, and I'm not quite sure exactly where it went wrong, but still, fear not, because the most important thing for you Top 5 Scary viewers though, is that this film is bloody, filled with gore and grotesque transformations, and from a visual perspective, it hits every box when it comes to what we expect from werewolf horror. Also, the cast is absolutely stacked, and it's almost impressive in itself that a film with such acting pedigree flopped so massively at the box office. Benicio del Toro, Sir Anthony Hopkins, Emily Blunt, Hugo Weaving. Yeah, some really big names. Written by David South and based upon the 1941 werewolf classic of the same name, The Wolfman tells the tale of a Victorian man, Lawrence Talbot, played by the awesome Benicio del Toro, who is fantastic in this film despite its critical review, that returns home to his estranged father, played by the legendary Sir Anthony Hopkins, only to discover that there's something lurking deep beneath the family tree. You see, the plot is simple, perhaps too simple in its approach for a remake of a film from 1941, but I think the reason that this film didn't exactly strike a chord where it was meant to was partly because of the ending and its resolution, which of course I won't spoil for you, but actually really makes sense. Still, Benicio del Toro produced this film himself, and he put so much love into it, as it was one of his first inspirations as an actor, and he was a massive fan of the original Wolfman, and you can tell. And that alone is reason enough to watch 2010's The Wolfman, because most of all, it's fun. Transformations, howling at the moon, Benicio del Toro ripping people's throats off. Yeah, we're spoiled for choice. Also, Max von Sydow makes a cameo in the director's cut, so there's another reason. Coming in at number 4, Where? 2013.
Oh, what a good boy. What's he doing?
Here, stay closer, Dad.
And in complete flip reverse to 2010's The Wolfman, this film in particular decided to pay its dues to werewolf horror and approach the genre from a completely new direction, and for the most part this film works to a frightening efficiency, and 2013's Were is very much a fresh snarling breath of air for fans of lycanthropy. Much like how Afflicted did the same for the vampire genre, this film does the same for werewolves by giving them a worthy documentary style entry into the halls of horror, although it kind of isn't that at all, and it technically isn't a found footage film. But still. Listen, this film definitely has its faults, and again this film wasn't exactly heralded by critics as a game changer for horror, mainly down to its CGI, but come on, it's far from being bad. The reason that this film is a success for fans of werewolves, aren't we all, is because most importantly, Were is a monster movie. It very much has a clear villain, and that allows it to pull no punches with the throat-ripping and lycanthropic rampage. Written and directed by William Brent Bow, Were follows a crew of investigators who are tracking down the deaths of an American family after they were vacationing in a French countryside, and their bodies were found ripped to shreds. Of course, the strange, shadowy local loner that lives with his mother out in the woods quickly becomes the source of hot suspicion, and then we're off rampaging our way across the city. There's not much more to it really. We watch werewolf horror movies to see a clawed feral lichen ravage their way across the screen, right? Where is that movie? And it's surprisingly great. Next up at number 3, Wolf, 1994.
Yeah, we all need some money.
I've got about $1,000 in my wallet. How much would you like to borrow? $5? 10?
And we touched upon this point in the first part of this video list series. More often than not, cinema has treated werewolf horror more so as a horror comedy, finding it difficult to balance the equal parts grotesque body horror with the reality of becoming a ravenous lycanthrope. And because of that, in the latter quarter of the 20th century, cinema approached werewolves with all the camp that they could throw at it. But the 90s were a different time. The 90s was the time of romance, romantic comedies, romantic thrillers, and romantic horrors. Just like 1994's Wolf, and who better to play the Lycan than the big bad wolf himself, Jack Nicholson. Listen, this film isn't your traditional werewolf horror. There's little of the vulgar thrill and excessive gore that we've come to love in the genre, but strangely, Wolf finds its intrigue within its exceptional cast and characterization. In fact, this film is perhaps the closest we've come to a mainstream depiction of werewolf horror, and because of that pedigree, it really does work. Wolf stars the legend that is Jack Nicholson as Will Randall, a highly successful editor-in-chief that subsequently gets bitten by a werewolf and loses his job pretty much in the same day. After getting betrayed by his best friend and colleague Stuart Swinton, played by James Spader, the pair quickly strike down a path that propagates who's who in the alpha males of both the wolf pack and the big city life of downtown Manhattan. Because the perfect foil to Jack's big bad wolf is of course James Spader, who is incredibly creepy in this film, and in fact the vast majority of the horror comes from his performance alone. You see, the best part about 1994's Wolf though is that the actual physical effects of the werewolves are second to none, and the plot takes itself seriously enough to segue the aforementioned camp by giving the borderline lycans reason to still maintain their human form. I won't say anything more, but surprisingly, Wolf really takes its folklore seriously, and that's a very good thing. Swinging in next at number 2, Howl, 2015. This film is great, and the fact that it's a British indie movie that went straight to DVD will probably do no wonders for the fact that it otherwise fell straight down the black hole void of surprisingly brilliant horror movies from the United Kingdom that didn't get the credit they deserved. You see, it should, because Howl is awesome, and it's very much in line with the pedigree of another British werewolf horror that made our part 1 list, Dog Soldiers. And guess what? This film is pretty much the second cousin of Dog Soldiers, as most of its production crew worked alongside Neil Marshall back in 2002, and this film's director, Paul Hyatt, was the guy who made the incredible prosthetics and physical effects of Marshall's werewolves. So that's reason alone to watch this film. And in fact, I think 2015's Howl may give Dog Soldiers a run for its money when it comes to the characterization of its lycans, because they are fantastically terrifying throughout this film. Also, Howl features the awesome Sean Pertwee in it, as in Wales from Dog Soldiers, albeit not for long. So yeah, another reason. Okay, I'll stop with the connections now. Much like Dog Soldiers, the brilliance of Howl is in its simplicity and its approach to the subgenre with respectful efficiency. There's not much to Howl really. A train breaks down in the middle of a forest in England during a full moon, and of course it's down to the down on his luck train conductor Joe, played by Ed Spielers, to try and keep his passengers alive. I'll say no more because there's not much more to ruin, but Howl is one of the most worthy werewolf experiences of recent times, and it's more than worth a watch. And finally, coming in at a number 1 spot, The Company of Wolves. Considered by many to be the greatest werewolf film ever made. And come on guys, it may be just that, but I had to save some material for part 2, right? Because in many ways The Company of Wolves really is awesome, if not perhaps the truest lycan folklore, down to the fact that it was written by one of the most astute minds in horror and magical realism, the late great Angela Carter. And if you haven't read her fantastic 1979 book The Bloody Chamber, stop what you're doing right now and do so, because for fans of top 5 scary videos that love nothing more than folklore and horror, it's a terrifying compendium of both of those things. The film itself is based upon the werewolf story that features in The Bloody Chamber, and true to her word, Carter saw through her vision to the silver screen. Essentially, this film is a retelling of Little Red Riding Hood, although obviously it peers much deeper beneath the darkness of its classic tale. The thing is though, The Company of Wolves is not a children's film in the traditional folklore sense, and it is definitely not an exploitation film either, perhaps in some kind of classic werewolf B-movie fashion. It's neither of those things, but it's also kind of both of those things at the same time. I think in many ways The Company of Wolves could have only been made during the specific age that it existed, and it very much is a product of its time, while still being an interpretation of a timeless tale. There's not much more to say really. There is just so much going on deep within the retelling of Rosaline and her long lost werewolf love that everyone's interpretation will be different. So in that case, I guess I'll leave it all for you all to interpret. Kicking off at number 5, Silver Bullet, 1985. You may sense a trend in this list, and it's that the early 80s seem to have a fervent desire to try and nail down the werewolf genre once and for all, and what better way to do that than with a tale from the king of horror himself, of the Stephen variety of course. Based on his novella Cycle of the Werewolf, Silver Bullet set out to capture that nostalgic, suburban coming-of-age miasma that Stephen King has so often perfected, and Silver Bullet is exactly that, whilst also just being a damn good horror film. Directed by Dan Attias with a screenplay from Stephen King himself, the film stars the one and only Corey Haim as Marty Kozlor, as well as none other than the legendary Gary Busey as his shambolically charming Uncle Red. The thing is though, Silver Bullet, whilst it manages to deliver some pretty decent, consistent spooks, is also a pretty hilarious horror comedy in parts, although perhaps at times it doesn't intend to be. Not only is it funny though, it also has a rare charm that is often found in some of King's similar works, particularly played out in the relationship between Marty and Uncle Red as they hunt down a werewolf plaguing their small town. It's a werewolf horror film and it's a Stephen King film, and that's good enough for me. Swinging in at number 4, The Howling, 1981. Talking of the 80s, now we're getting into some of the era's best. The fact that this film only comes in at number 4 might perturb some people, but believe me when I say that the next few films on this list are pretty tight. By the by though, 1981's The Howling is just a damn good movie, and when you look past the questionable performances, it's still an incredibly intelligent horror film. Directed by Joe Dante and based upon the Gary Brandon novel of the same name, The Howling tells the tale of a woman named Karen and her husband Bill, who are sent to the remote mountains of Los Angeles to a rehabilitation resort called The Colony. Well, you know what's what, guys. This is a werewolf list, and of course turns out the colony is actually populated by ravenous werewolves hungry for human flesh, and their sole intention is to bite as many humans as possible to bolster their ranks. Also, although they may seem a little dated now, the special effects in this film from the legendary Rob Bottin were absolutely cutting edge stuff at the time, and it served as testament to the creative lengths that filmmakers can go with the intention of turning an actor into a furious, snarling lycan. Werewolves, mountains, 80s blood and gore. Yeah, it's all good stuff. Coming up next at number 3, Dog Soldiers, 2001. And come on guys, I'm going to be a little bit biased here, but if you're asking me, there's only one British werewolf movie ever worth mentioning, and it's this one, 2001's Dog Soldiers, which kind of makes me feel a little bit old, actually. Nevertheless though, nostalgic werewolf movies aside, Dog Soldiers is just a fantastic action horror onslaught, and it's a must watch for any budding horror fanatic, and more importantly, it's quintessential British satire at its best, although you might need to sink your teeth in a little bit deeper to realise that. Written and directed by Neil Marshall, the man responsible for the awesome 2005 horror The Descent, Dog Soldiers tells the tale of a group of British soldiers out on a training exercise in the Scottish Highlands. Of course, turns out that they're being hunted by werewolves, but the thing that makes Dog Soldiers such a fantastic horror film is that Marshall does away with that worn out trope of boo-hoo, I'm a werewolf and it's super sad, why do I spend so much money on clothes, and instead just turns everything up to 11 and relies on some simple good old fashioned horror mathematics. Soldiers versus demonic wolf held dogmen, and because of that it's awesome. Dog Soldiers is essentially Evil Dead just with less questionable teenagers, more blood covered soldiers, and of course some horrifying man-eating werewolves. Next up at number 2, Ginger Snaps 2000. Ginger Snaps. What a film. What a fantastic teen horror tour de force filled to the brim with late 90s angst and of course puberty-based lycanthropy. The thing is though, just like how Dog Soldiers manages to depart its way from the tired tropes of werewolf horror, Ginger Snaps also did exactly that, just in a complete and utterly different direction, providing stark proof that you can still make a charming werewolf horror, you just have to do things a little bit weird. And that's what Ginger Snaps is. It's a calling card to all those kids that didn't quite fit in at school or had a macabre fascination with the darker sides of emotion, or, you know, ended up getting bitten by a werewolf. Either or. Written and directed by John Fawcett, Ginger Snaps tells a tale of two teenage sisters, Bridget and Ginger Fitzgerald, who share a morbid fascination with death, a theme which binds them together on Ginger's transmorphic lycanthropic journey. Let's not pander lightly. Whilst being a fantastic horror film, Ginger Snaps serves as a vivid bare bones allegory for the trials and tribulations that young women face when growing up, and it plays wholeheartedly to that formula that if you want to make a damn good werewolf movie, you better be willing to do things a little bit differently. Also, it's got one of the most fitting soundtracks of all time. Yeah, Ginger Snaps guys, of course it makes this list. And finally at our number 1 spot, An American Werewolf in London, 1981.
You gonna help me up or what?
I'm sure that you've all been watching this list waiting for the time that this one rears its ugly 80s head, because despite the point that I've been consistently trying to make, there is in fact one werewolf horror flick that earns the right to fully submit itself to those same tired tropes. This one, 1981's An American Werewolf in London, a complete and utter enigma that is far too horrifying to be a comedy and far too comedic to be a horror, but there in actual fact lies the true weird majesty of this film. Written and directed by the legendary National Lampooner John Landis, An American Werewolf was actually one of 3 werewolf movies that were all released in 1981. The Howling, which already made this list, Wolfen, which is great but isn't really a werewolf movie, and of course this one, which is perhaps the best werewolf movie ever made. But that's the thing, it doesn't even try to be. It somehow manages to be hilarious without even trying, while simultaneously being horrifying in the exact same moment. The main reason for that though are the genre-defining special effects from the legendary designer Rick Baker, who pretty much set the benchmark for his astounding physical depiction of a werewolf transformation. Let's not beat about the bush, the narrative for An American Werewolf is pretty cut and shut, but that's not why it's fantastic. It's in the tight dialogue, the zingy one-liners, the terrifying moments of body horror, and the point of no return that happens when a full moon looms ominously in the night sky. Kicking off at number 5, Wolfgang von Überwald, Discworld. And it is music to my lowly ears to hear the name of the late great eternal imagination and one of the most unique and wholeheartedly distinct writers of recent times, Sir Terry Pratchett, right here on Top 5 Scary Videos. Rest in peace. And really, without detracting from the werewolfness of this list, it really is important to note the creative achievements of this brilliant man. Discworld is one of the most unique series ever created. And of course, in tune with that uniqueness, we have one of the rare occasions where Discworld got a non-tongue-in-cheek dose of horror. And how would Sir Terry do that? Of course, Nancy Werewolves. But obviously fantasy Nazi werewolves. You see, whilst we'll touch on this later, there is a literary vein often mined by writers when applied to lycanthropy, much similar to their vampiric counterparts. If you're an all-powerful bestial creature of myth and legend, more often than not you treat people like trash and you want to take over the world. Go figure, right? The city of Ankh-Morpork is central to the Discworld series, and its protection is down to the City Watch. One of those watchmen is Captain Angua, who just so happens to be a kind and noble werewolf. His brother though, Wolfgang, he's a piece of work. You see, the two of them are descendants of a long line of werewolves, and because of that, Wolfgang believes in his divine right to superiority and domination. He views anything other than a pure-blood werewolf such as himself as an abomination, and so because of that, he believes it's pretty much open season when it comes to feasting on the peasantry. In his family's ancestral seat of Uberwald, which is Pratchett's home county of everything horror, Wolfgang steps up his master plan to take over Discworld in the most ruthless and relentless manner possible. During the event of the Fifth Elephant, Wolfgang reinstates the ancient rule of the game, where a human victim is chased for sport by a vicious and relentless pack of werewolves. Although similar to the age-old tactics of the aristocracy, Wolfgang's version of the game is rigged, and it's a pretty unsightly and unfair bloodbath. However, I'll leave you all to discover Wolfgang's ultimate fate. Take a look. Swinging in at number 4, Fenrir Greyback, Harry Potter. And you may be thinking, what the hell, Harry Potter? Jack, come on dude. But I'd say, hear me out, and also tone it down a bit, because when you actually hold a lens to this tooth and claw ridden character in particular, Fenrir Greyback is messed up. Put it this way, to cut a long story short, this guy didn't join Voldemort's cause because he believed in the Death Eater's ideological stance on wizarding superiority. He joined for one reason. If he allied himself with the Death Eaters, Fenrir would have a larger pool of potential victims to turn into other lycans, particularly children. In his own words, bite them young and raise them away from their parents, raise them to hate normal wizards. That's messed up. Fenrir Greyback is a werewolf who is so bitter, twisted and corrupted by the fact that he was infected with lycanthropy that his sole purpose on Earth is to infect as many other innocent people, particularly kids, and inflict them with the same pain that he feels. Metaphors aside, I should reiterate that this is a children's book. Yeah, and it doesn't stop there, because it gets personal. As the series explains, Remus Lupin, the kind and noble protector of Harry Potter throughout the later novels, who just so happens to also be a lycan, was in turn infected by Fenrir. But do you know why? It wasn't just a chance occurrence that Mr. Lupin was a lycan, it was because when he was a kid, Remus's father, Lyle Lupin, who was an employee at the Ministry of Magic, publicly stated that werewolves deserved nothing less than death following the murder of 2 innocent muggle children at the hands of Fenrir and his werewolf pack. When Fenrir heard those remarks, you know what he did? He didn't get revenge on Lyle, the guy who said it. He waited, bided his time, and on Remus's 5th birthday, he snuck in his bedroom, attacked him, and bit him, infecting him as a werewolf for the rest of his life. He infected the guy's infant child on his birthday. Yeah, I mean, it's pretty clear that Fenrir Greyback is an evil and vile werewolf that holds a grudge, but compared to some of the most evil of his literary counterparts, this guy makes it personal. And it's messed up. Next up at number 3, The Howling. And yeah, I do mean the whole novel, because although there are a few terrifying individuals in particular, the entire village of Drago, California deserves its spot on this list, and we're also going to slap on The Howling 2 on this list, because Gary Brandon's series only proves to get grosser and grosser the more lichen scar tissue that's added. And it's a little bit confusing really, because it's important to note that the 3rd entry of the Howling series, 1985's Echoes, completely rewrites the events of the first 2 books, which is an odd thing for an author to do, but forget about that. We've got Roy and Marcia to contend with, and they're pretty angry. First released in 1977 and written by Gary Brandner, in some sense, The Howling is perhaps the most tame depiction of lycans on this list, but it's in the savagery and innate will to commit violence far removed from the rationale of the human mind that allows it to earn its spot here. There is no humanity left behind in this series, just the primal hunger of the beast. It's a difficult trait to pull off, but when it's done right, it's certainly effective. You see, other than some pretty painful transformations, the werewolves in the Howling series are pretty cut and shut. For the most part, they're wolves. Not at all like their depiction in the 1981 movie of the same name, which you may or may not be aware of. And yeah, side note, that movie's awesome. But despite that, these wolves are phenomenally written, aptly taking their literary space as completely different creatures. You see, part of the curious allure of lycanthropy is the humanoid remnants left behind, that otherwise human form, albeit far more toothy and far more hairy. In Brander's novel, however, all of that is done away with, and in the wild, particularly in the mountain region of Drago, California, the howling herd on the edge of town could be man or wolf alike, and that's exactly where they want you. Also, that's without detailing the bleak tragedy told throughout the events of the first novel, which is pretty far-flung from the events of the film, and you should certainly give it a read if you haven't. But it's in the second novel where Brander really takes a terrifying turn in the mechanics of these visceral werewolves, and no spoilers, but if you're waiting for some kind of anthropomorphics, yeah, The Howling 2 has a sort of version of that. Pretty gross. Coming in at number 2, lycanthrope vampiri, necroscope. And yeah, I'm not entirely sure what else to call them, because if you're expecting this list to be exclusively non-vampire, I hate to break it to you, but Brian Lumley has something to say on the matter. And admittedly, whilst it may be a little sacrilege to honour the Crimson Lords here, the necroscope version of lycanthropy truly is something else entirely. As a brief overview to Brian Lumley's phenomenal horror fantasy series, vampires in necroscope are a species known as the Vampiri, an ancient species of creature from an alien dimension known as Starside, Sunside, who have existed on our world for millennia through the use of 2 interdimensional portals. Their vampirism is bestowed upon them by a sort of leech-like parasite that forms a symbiotic bond, granting them an infinite lifespan, untold powers, and the need to sustain it all by means of blood. Pretty cool, right? Well, that same leech in several cases throughout the Vampiri's history has a tendency to infect non-human creatures, often wolves or foxes, which in the technicalities of this list certainly adhere to the principles of lycanthropy. You see, in several cases these Vampiri wolves can assume a human-esque form to lure prey toward them, to infect and further spread their leech, as is seen with the Dweller. However, in other cases true lycans have been bred purposefully by means of infecting the Vampiri egg with the vampiric disease of lycanthropy, in most cases to horrific and immensely powerful results. One of those resulting vampire-werewolf hybrids was Radu Lycan, the Dog Lord, who was exiled from Sunside Starside to Earth, where he resigned himself in classic werewolf fashion to dominating the planet and spreading his unique Vampiri leech to a new unified empire of werewolf vampires. Sensing a theme here. Now, whilst Radu is an exception, as well as several other minor characters, it's also important to note that lycanthropy in this series more often than not goes wrong, and the results are, well, completely and utterly horrifying, and also disgusting. Yeah, definitely sensing a theme here. And finally, coming in at our number 1 spot, the Guru, World of Darkness. And you know what, guys, I saw so many of you passionately advocating for this entry to make up our list, and I'll hold my hands up and admit, I'm sold. I'm completely sold. After delving into the inner workings of Werewolf the Apocalypse and Werewolf the Forsaken, I'm relatively certain that the Guru are some of the most complete and utterly compelling monsters of horror ever penned. And I say penned in the loose term because although there are a vast wealth of novels written in this universe, the bulk of World of Darkness is based upon a fantasy tabletop series, which you may be familiar with, particularly if you're a fan of Vampire the Masquerade. But that's by the by, because I'm fairly certain that we can all agree on one thing. Tabletop is literature. If it's of a written form, it's literature. It doesn't have to be a novel penned in 1887 for it to be worthy of merit. It just has to be good. And believe me, the Guru certainly earned their place at the top of the pile. Although relatively difficult to get hold of now, the subsequent werewolf novels of the series detailed the origin of the titular Guru, and conceptually speaking, it bites a little bit closer to the bone than the rest of them. As told in Guru oral history, this secret civilization of lycans have always existed, clawing onto their existence by means of their eternal duty to Gaia, maintaining the balance of nature. Essentially, what sets the Guru apart is that they are the arbiter of humanity. If human civilization gets too out of control, the Guru sweep in and cull an out of control population. In its purest form, World of Darkness lays out the true meaning of the lycan and their human counterparts, the hunter and the hunted. And not only that, but these eternal predators have established complete mastery of their transformation, harnessing the ability to pretty much appear as any werewolf that you've ever seen in fiction. Their tribes are numerous, they have complete and utter domination over their planet, and in the truest terms, the Guru are a literal force of nature. Yeah, deserved number 1.
Number 5 in this list is the human animal. Yeah, you heard that right, guys. The story that we're dealing with here is of a creature that wasn't quite human, but it also wasn't quite animal either. CVLT Nation says, in July 2004 near Gallup, New Mexico, I had my first and only encounter with a skinwalker. Before this, I used to say, I'll believe it when I see it. Well, I'm a believer now. What I saw was not full human nor full animal. I was moving and had just completed the cleaning and was with my 10-year-old son. We had called it a night and were headed to our new place. As we walked out the front door, I saw a figure move from behind my neighbor's car to a nearby tree that stood between our apartments. It didn't have red glowing eyes, snarling teeth, or a rotten smell. It did move quickly, but not quick enough to avoid the light from a nearby light post and the porch lights. It didn't look at me or come toward me. It moved as if trying to avoid being seen. I was within 15 feet of it, but I did not look back to fully inspect it. What I saw was a wolf-like animal that sort of resembled the Beast in Beauty and the Beast, just not cartoonish. It had brown fur that completely covered it. It wasn't a pelt, it was a very large wolf. It didn't have any human traits except that it walked on its hind legs. It cowered behind the tree as we got into our vehicle. Now let's try to come up with a logical explanation before we buy into the Skinwalker theory, just to rule things out. Could this have been a bear? Well, maybe, but I kind of doubt it considering our friend here refers to it as a wolf-like creature several times. So he definitely didn't get any bear-like qualities from it. Okay, so it's not a bear. Well, what about being an actual wolf? I mean, this is probably the most possible, except it literally walked on its hind legs. Wolves have been known to get up on their hind legs for a second or two, maybe just to stand on them for a moment, but they don't specifically walk on them. That's not something that happens, guys. This wasn't a wolf and it wasn't a bear, and it also wasn't a human either. He says it himself. The only really true human characteristics is the fact that it did walk on its hind legs. So it's not a wolf, it's not a bear, it's not a human. What the hell is it? Well, now we're starting to get into Skinwalker territory. I can't really think of any other animal that would have the things he described this one had, other than maybe a skinwalker. Very lucky that the creature didn't attack and he made it out alive. Number 4 on this list is the Grove. So this is a story told by the friend of the person it happened to. CVLT Nation says, I've heard a lot about coyotes and skinwalkers and had a weird experience or two with coyotes. Creepiest was walking up to my sleeping bag being surrounded in paw prints without even hearing them during the night. But never anything paranormal, so to speak. Patrick's story, however, kept me from going back to my favorite backcountry secret stash. He was leaving the area one morning, had been camping there a couple days, and said there was a coyote that always seemed to be close by, like in his peripheral vision, but never overt. He loaded up his truck and started to drive down the wash out to the fire road. At the end of the wash, he could see the coyote following him. When he pulled onto the road, it was running next to him. Now he was freaked out, so he sped up. He said he was going 35 or so, and it was running along beside him. Definitely not possible. When he looked back, the coyote was running on 2 legs and was wearing what Patrick said looked like buckskin pants. An instant later, it was a person wearing a coyote fur keeping pace with his truck. When he looked again, it was gone. We never went back to the Grove after that. Dude, that sounds like something directly out of a fever dream. It was running alongside your car for one, then it was wearing pants, then it was a person wearing pants, and then it was gone? Like literally full-on walking nightmare right there, guys. Also, what is it with these skinwalkers and chasing down cars? We had a few stories in the first part about that as well. I guess they do really just like to run fast. Number 3 on this list is the toy rocking horse. This story doesn't even make any sense at all. It's just next levels of crazy. CVLT Nation says, my uncle is Mexican and Native American. This happened in the Mojave Desert in Southern California. He was driving around with his girlfriend late at night and they saw something that looked like a huge black dog on the side of the road. He slowed down and the dog began crossing the road. Instead of walking like a normal dog would, this thing moved like a toy rocking horse. He said it stopped in the middle of the road and stared right at them and its eyes had a red glow. My uncle is the most badass person I know and it scared the crap out of him. So I'm honestly trying to figure out how the heck it moved like a toy rocking horse. That kind of doesn't make sense, you know? How would it get anywhere if it just kept rocking back and forth? I don't really understand if I'm being honest, but apparently that's what went down. Which would definitely be enough to scare the bejesus out of me and never go back to the Mojave Desert again.
Number 2, the proof is out there. Our next sighting comes to us today from the History Channel of all places. I guess in a way, it could be considered modern day history, right? It details a sighting by 2 Canadian security guards in 2021 of a possible sighting with this creature up close and personal. You see, it was May 2021 in Saskatchewan, and 2 security guards working on a Cree reservation were driving home after a 12-hour shift when they spotted something bizarre on the drive home. They recorded it, and we've got a bit of footage for you here to play. We'll roll it now and let us know what you think you can see down below. It's very difficult to make out entirely, but if you're really looking, and the video does outline it a bit, which helps, you can see a translucent, ghostly figure appearing in the clearing while they're driving. This figure seems formless, almost ethereal in a way, as if it's not even a solid creature. It blends in with the grass so well, it almost seems as if it's part of the scenery or wildlife that's straight up just come to life and sprouted out of the ground. Now, when this clip was posted, commenters were going wild because they thought this could be definitive proof of one of these shape-shifting evil medicine men caught on tape. Now, invisibility, or, being see-through, isn't usually described as being an ability of one of these creatures. I think people might be getting them confused with the Predator from the awesome action movie series. An important distinction to note when we talk about these things is that they're not cryptids per se. And shouldn't be talked about as such or considered like they're a creature or a wild animal, contrary to how it might seem, but rather the legend of these things is that they're shamans and medicine men who have isolated themselves from the rest of the tribe and way of life and are engaging in dark, unholy practices. Now, that's not to say that invisibility is totally impossible. It could be within the realm of these things. I think if you're shape-shifting, theoretically, you could also be turning invisible, but I'm just saying they have enough tricks up their sleeve already. Shape-shifting feels like enough of a cool party trick. You don't need to also add being invisible on that. Your resume's full enough. You got the job. Number 1, the Washington sighting. Now, our next sighting comes to us from Reddit, posted to the Skinwalker subreddit. It's a first-hand account of a Washington local describing what they thought they saw on a camping trip with their partner. The poster describes going camping with her boyfriend, the 2 of them having significant camping experience. They both grew up in a rural area surrounded by farmland, so they're no stranger to the outdoors. And they decided for a fun, romantic weekend camping trip to go camping about 45 minutes away from Yakima around indigenous territory. They pull up to the lake at about 10:45, and immediately on rolling up, the poster said she got a terrible feeling, like deep in her stomach. She said it wasn't just like kind of a bad feeling about things, but a profoundly bad vibe, saying as if it felt like there was evil radiating deeply throughout her. I personally would turn the car around if that happened to me, but hey, power to you. She realizes as she's looking around the campsite, the reason she feels so strongly about this place is because she's had a dream about it before. It's not just deja vu or something, but something she had seen in her mind's eyes. She tells her boyfriend that she's dreamt this place, everything about it, every little detail, and goes into detail, talking about seeing a pale, creepy face with reflective eyes staring at her through the trees and then running as fast as she could. Pretty scary dream. So they pull up to the campsite eventually. Her boyfriend lights a smoke and they sit around the campfire and soon after start to hear screaming. But she says it doesn't sound like human screaming the way you expect it to. It sounds like someone had distorted and spliced together screams from multiple sources into one, harmonizing perfectly. Now, moments later, this scream appears again, only this time the scream feels even closer. Her boyfriend puts his smoke out and grabs a weapon from their truck, and they wait in the tent for the rest of the night. When they wake up that next morning and check on their site, the cigar had been taken. Now, in some legends, when you hear these creatures far away, when you hear the voice screaming, it means they're closer than you think. So what do you think? Did these 2 get lucky? Was it just paranoia in the woods setting in? Or did they narrowly avoid being the main characters in the next Blair Witch movie?
Number 5 on this list is the orange eyes. As a decently recent university graduate, this story is pretty triggering to me. User John shared his story of how a relaxing midnight stroll turned terrifying when he came face to face with 2 skinwalkers. According to his chilling story, John was out late one summer night. While listening to music and enjoying the cool weather, he walked near a large empty field that was adjacent to a college campus. Suddenly, he felt something staring at him. Shining his flashlight out into the darkness, he saw 2 sets of glowing orange eyes staring back at him. The eyes were at least 7 feet off the ground and stared at him without blinking once. John made a mad dash for safety. As he was running, he turned back to see one of the creatures chasing him. John became even more frightened when he got a better glimpse of the fast-moving creature behind him. It looked like a giant wolf. Quickening his pace, John reached his home safely, but he remains fearful of the monsters he saw that night, which he believes were skinwalkers. I titled this entry Orange Eyes because that, plus the fact that they were 7 feet off the ground, are the biggest things that stick out to me here. A wolf's eyes aren't typically bright orange. They can be a mild hue of that color, but I doubt that it was a mild hue if that's the first thing that stuck out to him in the night. Not to mention the fact that these creatures were 7 feet off the ground and how unnatural that is. Even if for some reason a wolf stood on its hind legs, it still wouldn't be that tall. Whatever it was that was after John that evening doesn't sound like the friendliest of creatures if you ask me. He's probably pretty lucky to have made it out alive. Number 4 on this list is the white face. This story is especially scary because it seems like the Skinwalker is actually stalking our victim. Ranker says, "My roommate has told me this story a few times and I want to see if anyone else has had similar experiences. As he tells it, he was driving home super late at night, maybe around 3 or 4 a.m. in a suburb of Phoenix, Arizona, both times that this occurred. The first time he was driving alone on a road that has an open field to the left of it when out of nowhere a black figure on all fours bounds up out of the field and across the road in front of his car. As soon as the figure got to the other side of the road, it stops with inhuman quickness, turns around, and looks directly at my roommate. He described the figure as looking simian, completely black except for the face. The creature's face was a stark white human face. Not white as in Caucasian, but white as snow. This happened again a few weeks later, but this time the creature was sitting in a tree. As his car approached, it climbed down the tree, again with inhuman quickness, bounded across the road, stopped on a dime, and turned around and made eye contact with him. This time he had a friend in the car who also saw it and began freaking out. It was the same exact thing as the first time, a simian black body with a snow white expressionless human face. My roommate, ever the curious one, turned the car around and began searching for the creature, but it was nowhere to be seen. What has a totally black and creature-like body but also a white as snow pale human face? I'll answer that one for you guys. A skinwalker. Scariest part about this one, like I said earlier, is the fact that it went out of its way to find this same guy again. I find it hard to believe that he just happened to stumble upon this creature just out of coincidence. I think it's far more likely that the creature was looking out for this guy and putting itself into spots that it might run into him. Really not a pleasant thought if you think about it. Number 3 on this list is the white mask. This one is kind of similar to the last one we looked at, but instead of a pale white face, it seemed as if the creature was wearing a white mask. Ranker says, in Hunt for the Skinwalker, George Knapp and Colm Kelleher relay the stories of those who came into contact with skinwalkers near Native American tribal lands. One account from a New Mexico highway patrol officer states that while patrolling the highways of New Mexico, he saw a skinwalker on 2 separate occasions. In his first encounter, a creature wearing a white mask appeared next to his window, seemingly attaching itself to the car door. But then he realized it was simply running beside the vehicle, keeping pace at highway speeds. A few days later and around the same area, he encountered the creature again. What makes this tale even more intriguing is that at least one other officer claimed to have seen the same ghoulish being while patrolling the area. Maybe it was actually a white mask that our friend saw in the previous entry instead of the white face he described. Either way, this one seems dangerous as all holy hell. To be able to run with a car going on the highway? Yeah, that is pretty far from natural, guys. I'd say that considering there were multiple witnesses here, this is probably some of the best proof we have that these creatures are legit.
Number 2, the shopping mall. This next one is a wild one. It's titled Skinwalker at a Shopping Mall. Hey, I guess they want to check out the lush sales sometimes too. I get it, take care of that fur. It starts by saying, I'm a security guard at a gigantic shopping mall with some other guards. I went off to my area while the others went to theirs. I started to do my rounds, going into shop. It was getting kind of close to Halloween and the mall was packed. That's when I noticed him. This cloaked figure coming towards me smoothly. It bumped into me as it passed me and I felt this feeling of fear. I called out to it to see if I'd get a response. I yelled something, I don't know, like stop, right there. It didn't acknowledge. that I was there, so I followed it to see where it was going. It stopped and turned slightly to see if it was being followed, then continued down. But the pursuit was cut short by an elderly man falling down in a shop. I went to go help him up. I turned back to where the cloaked figure was walking around, but it wasn't there. It vanished into thin air. I went to have my break, and when I was about to walk through the door, I happened to run into my friend. I asked him, almost as a joke, "Hey, you didn't happen to see a cloaked figure walking around?" He went white and said yeah, and this time it was looking at me. We both sat down and didn't bring it up again for the rest of the shift. When the night shift began, I hopped on the cart, fired up the belt driver, and started doing my round. Then I heard a sound that sounded like laughing. I yelled, "Who's there?" and I shone my light on what looked like the rear end of a grizzly, a gigantic grizzly bear, but its front half looked like a bobcat with red eyes and fangs. "Who's there?" it said in a distorted version of my own voice. I was done. I jumped into the cart and I sped all the way to the entrance of that mall and I ran outside. I've never seen it since that incident. And did you happen to look for a new job or something? Maybe change states, or are you still working at the mall where you know there's probably a Skinwalker at? And number 1, I tried to save the best for last with this story posted by user Go Cougar about a Skinwalker and their family. You take a listen. I had to snip just a little bit out of this one for timing, but we kept the big beats of it, and it's a good story, and I'm glad we have it. After graduating high school, Aunt Ani got a job at the grocery store. She started dating a regular and would sneak out at night. It was nothing out of the ordinary until my mom would return home seeing strange items such as tomahawks and animal skulls carved with strange writing and scripture in the backyard. Growing up listening to many stories about witchcraft, skinwalkers, and wendigos like most kids in the res, she immediately became curious about these items. It had become obvious that the relationship wasn't all that it seemed. My mom took one of these skulls to the tribal elder. After examining it, the elder told my mom that the skull was crafted to perform black magic, and the elder was very suspicious. A few days later, Sean and Annie snuck out to the backwoods, but my mom decided to stalk them to see what they were doing. Sean and Annie arrived at an open space in the woods while my mom was hiding in the bushes. They fell into a trance and fell onto the ground screaming and laughing uncontrollably, followed by a sound of bone cracking. They transformed into tall, half deer, half human creatures standing on their back legs. My mom bolted out of the bushes, running back to the trailer to tell the elders everything she saw. A few days later, my mom went to Annie's trailer to pack up and found a note written that said, "I love you. I'm off to a better world." And that was the last Annie was heard from. But 2 months after Annie's disappearance, my mom got woken up by a voice calling her name during an afternoon nap. She immediately recognized the voice. It was Aunt Annie. But when she went outside, she didn't see anyone around except for a deer with a lip and bright green eyes. This deer walked up to my mom and bowed as if it wanted my mom to pet it. My mom believed it was Aunt Annie, her final goodbye. Whew.
Coming in at number 5, we've got Jack Fiddler, Wendigo Hunter. And we'll kick this one off with not 1, not 2, but 14 purported Wendigo sightings. Possibly more if Jack wasn't able to get them before his untimely death. Back in the day, there was a man who claimed to be able to kill Wendigos. This man was known as Zauno Hishigo Galbo, but European settlers just knew him as Jack Fiddler. He lived in what's now known as the Sandy Lake First Nation and was a well-respected healer. He would go from community to community, ensuring the health of many people, but often he was sought out for more macabre business, fighting cannibalistic creatures. Jack would euthanize anyone who felt that the curse of the Wendigo was upon them. They sought him out to end their lives before they caused any trouble for their loved ones in their communities. Potions and ceremonies would mitigate damage, but death was the only surefire way to end a Wendigo's curse. And even then, it's a little tricky to deal with. So Jack would go from place to place, ensuring that Wendigos truly found their final resting place. After euthanizing the cursed individual, he would also perform a ritual cremation and burial to seal it away for good. Tales of his exploits eventually reached the Mounties though, who did not seem to think what Jack was doing was community service. After some investigation, they found out about a woman who was thought to be possessed. She was choked to death by her father-in-law and his brother. Any guesses as to who the brother was? Jack Fiddler. So the Fuzz arrested the men, claiming that what the law forbids, no pagan belief can justify. Jack eventually managed to slip away from the police before his trial and killed himself to avoid the long arm of the law. 14 counts of murder is a tough sentence, especially when assisted suicide and demon hunting were not considered valid defenses. Coming in at number 4, we got the Wendigos of Blackwood Mountain. Boom. butterfly effect. This pod of people eaters comes from the choose your own horrific adventure game Until Dawn, featuring a pre-Bohemian Rhapsody Rami Malek. In this game, you make decisions that will end up sealing the fate of 8 unlucky vacationers. See, this group of pals decided to return to Blackwood Mountain a year after a tragic disappearance. They brought some friends up and pulled a nasty prank, resulting in one running off into the night. What the friends might not have known is that the area had been frequented by Wendigos for centuries. European miners came to the area back in the 1800s and were warned off by natives who claimed the mountain was sacred. As settlers tend to do, they ignored this advice and started excavating anyways. In doing so, they released the Wendigo spirits. Later on in the mid-1900s, a group of miners came back for some of those sweet, sweet minerals. They fell victim to some unfortunate accidents though and found themselves trapped in the mine shafts. Forced to cannibalize to survive, the remaining miners became Wendigos. After a powerful Wendigo was killed, its spirit was transferred to the unfortunate friend who ran off into the night. And you guessed it, this unfortunate individual came back with a vengeance. One by one, depending on how you play it, people fall victim to the Wendigo of Blackwood Mountain, sometimes becoming terrible creatures themselves. So next time you're in a survival situation, ask yourself if it's worth eating people and becoming a depraved monster in order to live. I'd take the long nap, to be honest. Coming in at number 3, we've got a deep woods discovery. There's nothing quite like having your expectations subverted, yeah? I don't want to spoil too much of this story before I tell it, so here we go. I found this one in green text format, and it seems to be coming from a person living in a rural area. Every year, they find that hiking in the wooded area near their home is quite pleasant in the fall, so they head out to do just that. However, they seem to find some of the more overgrown areas unsettling. Makes sense, especially if you're far away from society at large. As they explore a little more, they notice something dive into the bushes, giving them a start. At that point, the hiker has had enough and decides to book it. There's something nearby though, and it seems to be following quite closely. Eventually, the hiker makes it to the end of the trail and realizes that they have to go back where they came from. After the experience they had, they're not looking forward to it. In the end, they do indeed buck up and head back to the top of the trail. When they get to the part where they saw something dive into the bushes, they realize that it wasn't a monster or anything sinister, but in fact a little girl. She calls out for help, but as the hiker gets closer, a strange feeling washes over him. It looks like the girl is hurt and can't walk on her own, but when the hiker gets close enough for the little girl to see him, she begins screaming bloody murder. Oh no. It's at this point that the hiker gives up all pretenses and eats the girl, taking her form. Bet you didn't see that one coming. Coming in at number 2, we've got the Moose Man. Let's take a quick trip to Alberta, except instead of seeing the mountains or hockey, we'll go looking for shape-shifting terrors. Hooray! There were tales circulating around for a while about some sort of centaur with moose features instead of horse ones, although many claim these to be patently false. That's not going to stop me from talking about it as if it were real though. This thing lived by the river and never got too close to human settlements. However, it would often kill and mutilate game animals to make them unusable. In fact, it's also said to have been involved in the killing and maiming of many men as well. Beyond the moose-centaur comparison, there isn't much to be said about the way this creature looks. It's huge, as all moose tend to be, and walks around with flesh hanging from its antlers. Like many creatures in the same vein, it reeks of something otherworldly and tends to make hideous noises when encountered. Whether the moose look is its only avatar or one of many forms, we may never know. And finally, at number 1, we've got the Roadrunner. Meep meep indeed. While walking his dog at around 10 p.m, our storyteller came across a couple dead rabbits accompanied by a horrid stench. Assuming it was just a fox or something, he moved right along. Soon after, his dog started acting super weird though. It wouldn't move at all and seemed to be staring at something off in the distance, eyes wide. Then the smell came back. This time he couldn't quite place where it was coming from, but he'd heard enough stories about bad smells and evil vibes in the woods to know to be careful. He took his dog and got off the path, hiding in some tall grass to the side. That's when he saw it. Something almost indescribable. Gray skin, rotten flesh, a horrible, emaciated horse's head, limbs that only seemed to half work. Made him want to run away at full speed immediately, but that was a bad call with it so close by. Sneaking seemed to be the better choice. The man and his dog started creeping away and got about 50 feet. The creature was out of sight now and the man thought he could start running. But apparently the Roadrunner knew exactly where he was trying to sneak away to and was immediately on his tail. Thankfully, the sneaking gave this man and his dog a bit of a head start and they were off to the races. As they ran from this awful beast, the man could hear it breathing. It sounded like an overexcited child, happy to be running in the woods in search of something good. Thankfully, getting back to the jagged gravel path proved to be a challenge for the Roadrunner. Whatever was wrong with its limbs made it difficult to traverse the rocky terrain, and eventually it gave up, screaming all the while. The man hasn't seen the creature again, but that's no guarantee that it's not around. shapeshifting isn't uncommon with these kinds of things. Well, how do you feel about the Wendigo now? Any better or worse than when we started?
Number 5. Some strange noises. One of the creature's signature calling cards is said to be its horrific wails. Its pained shrieks that don't sound like any animal you'd recognize. It's also said that it's been able to imitate human voices to better lure out its prey. And perhaps those disconcerting sounds were caught on tape as recently as 2019, when a series of howls and shrieks left a hunter and a government biologist searching for answers as to what was going on in those woods. Gino Mikas was hunting with his wife and grandson in northwest Ontario in a fairly remote rural area, about 50 kilometers away from the nearest sign of civilization, most likely an en route. Sorry, rest of the world, that joke is just for Ontario. It's a Canadian cryptid, what can I say? At first, I thought it was a moose, but my mind changed when it screamed again and again. Mikas is an avid hunter, a resident of Sioux Lookout, and knows his way around the woods and what creatures should be living in it. He added on saying, "I've heard many different animals in the wild, but nothing like this. I grew up hunting with my grandfather for the first 12 years of my life. The howls initially came from the distance, but soon appeared closer." We've got the clip, so why don't you take a listen for yourself and see what you think. Now, some speculated that it could be a grizzly bear. However, there's not a lot of evidence for that since grizzlies don't really live in these surrounding areas. They are known to roam, but there's not reports of grizzly bears nearby. Others speculated that it could be a wolf, which definitely is possible, but you would think that an expert seasoned hunter would recognize a wolf. So, there's a number of people who speculate that this could be the mythical Wendigo caught on tape. And if you're looking for way more stories of folklore, creatures, cryptids, well, you already know what channel I'm going to recommend. It's the one you're watching right now. We've got tons and tons of scary lists just waiting for you to discover. So hit that subscribe button, please make sure to hit that bell so you don't miss a single scream and get all caught up. But do that at the end of this video if you wouldn't mind. I got way more Wendigo sightings coming up for you. Number 4, Southern Ontario sighting. Our next story also comes to us from my home province of Ontario. Makes a lot of sense. It's where a number of regional myths revolving around the Wendigo all originally stem from. Now this one comes to us from an anonymous Redditor who posted to the Skinwalker subreddit detailing a strange encounter that they had, possibly with the creature. You take a listen to this. "I decided to take my dog out for a walk this afternoon and not put my headphones in. As we were walking along, I heard a voice calling out my name in a sing-songy way. I stopped and looked around and I called for my dog to come back to me, and he stopped where he was and stared at me for a while and then eventually came to me. I didn't acknowledge it. I walked around a little more and still didn't see anything. Now, I live with my parents, and my mom knows that stories about skinwalkers freak me out. A few days ago, we were having a bonfire, and she hid and tried to call for me in a scary voice to freak me out, so I assumed this was the same thing happening. I continued walking and I heard, 'Come over here,' and I was so freaked out because this sounded like it was my voice saying it, and I heard this so much more clearly, like it was coming from inside my head. I have no idea what was out there this afternoon, but I can tell you for certain I will never walk out there without my headphones on again. Can honestly say this was the weirdest experience of my life." Now, if you believe the legends and folklore, if you hear the creature calling out for you, the only correct thing to do is to ignore its attempts to lure you away. You don't want to go toe to toe with this thing. You're not going to stand a chance. So it sounds like the original poster in this situation, even though they were scared out of their wits, still made the right decision and got off with just a scare and a story instead of something much, much worse. Number 3, the man in my scope. This next story comes to us from an interview that a YouTuber, Funkalopagus, did with a hunter who thinks he had an encounter with the creature or something else deeply strange late at night. He originally posted this story to Reddit with the name Perpetual Connection, so that's what we'll call him if it comes up. He says he was hunting boar. He was saving up for a while to get a special thermal vision scope. He took it to a range and waited from 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. to find a good boar to bag, but surprisingly wasn't finding anything. And he noted that the area that he went up to was shockingly empty of wildlife, no deer, no rabbits, no coyotes, nothing, as opposed to it usually being pretty plentiful. So he was getting himself ready to leave, assuming it must have just been a bad day, when he heard a crunch come from the direction that he'd entered the park. So he raised his scope to see what it was and saw initially what he assumed was a bear, some big mass on his scope. He zoomed in a bit and jolted when he realized it wasn't a bear, but looked a bit more like a man. Now what was disturbing him was that he was about 30 miles away from any other public areas. And there were no other cars parked around, no wildlife to speak of. The only other living thing next to him was this person in his scope, who happened to be completely naked, twitching and grabbing at all the foliage. The OP then says that the mysterious figure looked up at him and in an extremely unsettling, high-pitched feminine voice began to call out for help. The hunter believed that he was being trapped and scrambled to escape. He said it didn't sound like this voice should be coming from this entity, and he said that the creature was staring at him with a wide smile and unfurled itself standing on its back legs, standing 6 feet tall or maybe more. He pointed his weapon at the unknown entity and warned for it to stand down, and said that it arched on its fours again and hissed at him like a cat before disappearing into the brush, screeching in wail. The hunter would return to his car and drive off in an absolute panic, I think like most of us would, and he would tell authorities what he saw, but he was only reprimanded for hunting at night. I mean, fair enough. If I reported that story to the sheriff or something, I think I as the sheriff would hear that and just, scratch that off, be like, oh, I'm not messing with that. So what do you think? Did he happen to come across someone in the woods who was just having a wild night on all of the substances, or was that a close encounter with death that he narrowly avoided? Number 2, the 2019 sighting. This next sighting happened in 2019. It's the same time as the first point. Coincidence? Absolutely, but worth mentioning nonetheless. This next story was posted to Reddit by a user named Bradley Innovates. Bradley tells about how he had just been discharged, honorably, don't worry, from the Marines and was returning home to his home state of Alabama. Sweet home Alabama, and was catching up visiting on old friends. His best friend Jacob in particular. The two of them had been friends their whole life and usually got up to, boyhood stuff, hanging out in the woods, that kind of thing. The two of them traveled out to a secluded campsite that they'd enjoyed when they were younger, bringing a long arm with them for target practice. The two were chatting and eventually got onto stories of cryptids in the woods, namely, you guessed it, the Wendigo. His friend told him one could summon this creature by speaking its name 3 times into the woods like Bloody Mary. I've said its name like 9 times in this video. I'm speaking into a camera, so I hope that's okay. I hope I'm not cursing you out there. Might be best just to sage your house a little bit after watching this video. Anyway, Bradley played along and spoke his name out 3 times, only to discover nothing happened. Until he heard a snap in the woods, and his reflexes instinctively darted backwards. A few coyotes ran by, and his friend decided that it was enough scares for the woods and started to pack up when a tree began to fall forward towards them. Now, if that wasn't already unnerving, the Redditor said the next thing he heard was the voice of his friend's younger sister calling out to them both, except they didn't bring her along and she wasn't anywhere nearby, and that's when both of them knew they were in far deeper trouble than they thought. They claimed that they saw an emaciated, fleshy monster, deathly thin, with next to no meat on its bones, skin as pale as ash, and a vibrant blue eyes. That actually sounds pretty familiar, to be honest. The men fired at it and ran screaming from the woods towards their car. They escaped, horrified by what they saw, but luckily alive. If this story is true, then that has to be a real-life encounter with the creature. Number 1, Jack Fiddler. There truly aren't many sightings or stories of Wendigos, and indigenous people don't particularly like to share these stories out of their tribes. Despite the popularity on apps like TikTok, it's a pretty niche bit of folklore. Of course, it could also be because there are people out there maintaining the local population. Jack Fiddler, or Zanhano Gahengogawa, was an Ojibwe shaman living in Sandy Lake in the late 1800s, early 1900s. He was renowned among his people for being a hunter of the supernatural, defending his tribe from threats that no one else would be willing. There are many documented cases of indigenous people who, feeling themselves lose control to the appetite or the spirit within them, would request that someone close and trusted would be the one to finish them off. This could be a close friend of the family or a family member. It was an act of mutual trust. Zanhano Gahengogawa claims to have felled 14 Wendigos during his lifetime like this. Of course, not everyone would see it this way. By 1906, word would reach the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, the Mounties, that to them there was a, this is a quote, a band of pagans in the habit of killing one another whenever one gets delirious through fever or other causes. By 1907, the mounted police had arrested Zanhano Gahingogawa and his brother Pescoquan for the death of Pescoquan's daughter-in-law. Locals in the tribe decried the decision, saying they didn't understand, and that the man they were accusing of being a killer was a quiet, dignified man who lived with a clear conscience. After 15 weeks of imprisonment, Zanhano Gahingogawa would escape from the police escort holding him. When they found him, he was lying on a rock with a sash tied in a knot around his neck. It was his way out of escaping persecution.
Number 5. Day trip gone wrong. When in the wilds of Alberta, people are often advised to be aware of the wildlife that might wander into your path and how to deal with it. It is not uncommon for people to see deer, bears, and even the occasional mountain lion. But one creature that they are not warned about in many of the pamphlets is Bigfoot. As this family found out, this is their story as related by their father. There was still some snow in the bush. We were picking dead tamarack and spruce deadfall to take home for making beanpole teepees in our garden. We had our 3 kids with us, aged around 3, 6, and 8 at the time. My wife and I were dragging the dry fall out of the bush and figuring which ones we could work with. After what seemed like a couple hours, we had a stack of about 25 poles, and we were eating lunch with the kids when things went absolutely crazy. At first we got screamed at big time. Then, stuff comes flying out of the bush at us, like rocks, tree limbs, and sod hunks. Sounded like things breaking in the bush and whacking sounds. It was f***ing nuts. Nothing hit any of us. We had been in that area many times prior in the years, and never had anything like this occur. Our 8-year-old jumped into the truck and locked all the doors, with the other 4 of us doing laps around the vehicle. I grabs our 3-year-old and gets her into the back seat through the window, and I'm trying to figure out who is screwing with us. It is funny now, not so much back then. Now this is weird. First, whoever or whatever was crawling on all 4s over all the downed timber and old logs, staring right at me as it moved back and forth. From what I could make out, and another 1 or 2 were behind it, also on all 4s, crawling around behind with the closer one that seemed way bigger, one that I could make out, although the bush. These ones were about 15 to 20 feet inside the tree line. We were parked in the ditch off the old lease road. About 30 to 40 feet further into the timber was another 2, or a couple persons silhouette we could make out. They were moving through the trees, making animal crazy sounds, big deep volume. We were like, holy crap, no person could do that. No way anyone could belt it out like that. Not a chance. This went on for what seemed a good couple minutes. All of the kids began freaking out and crying inside the vehicle. My wife was standing with me when we were watching this go on, and then started telling me, let's get out of here. And I am trying to get a grip on the shit I am looking at through inside the trees. I don't think I was freaked out by what was happening. I could just not process what I was looking at. I still recall thinking, why are some people trying to scare the crap out of us out here? Number 4. Wycliffe Regional Park. Despite being posted on the Sasquatch Alberta website, our next tale actually takes place in British Columbia. However, it does feature a man who went out looking for a creature and claims to have come across the legendary cryptid, as well as their young. In his own words, this happened near Wycliffe Regional Park, Perry Creek Road, Cranbrook, BC. I was out a few years ago looking for Sasquatches. I made noises to attract any creature, and I got several responses. They kept getting closer and closer. Then I heard the footsteps, more vocalizations, closer and closer. Then I saw it. For only a second and a half, a large, upright creature with a smaller child creature brushed past my view and disappeared into the forest. I started chasing it, but could not keep up. Right where I saw it moments before, there were footprints 6 inches into the ground, and hair on trees where they were. I know this sighting is not in Alberta, but pretty close, so I just wanted to let you know about my experience. I did take photos, but they were lost when my old phone broke. I had been there 3 to 5 times before with friends, but we didn't find much evidence until the other time I reported about earlier today. I have not been back there because I am just shocked and kind of terrified of what I saw. I went out there just because I didn't know what was on the dirt road past the Wycliffe Regional Park, and I just wanted to know what I would find back there. Number 3. Medicine Hat. Next, We have a tale from a man who saw Bigfoot as a child without ever being aware what a Sasquatch even was until this encounter. However, this experience with the legendary creature left quite an impression on the man, who can still recall the event in great detail, even all these years later. As he put it, I first started reading about Sasquatches in 1972 after my first encounter. I was born in Calgary, and about once a month we would go to Banff, Kananaskis, or Bragg Creek to go camping. I got used to seeing bats and other wildlife at a young age. On the last weekend of August 1972, we went to Medicine Hat to visit friends. On Saturday the 26th, we went to have a picnic around 10:30 a.m. in Strathcona Park. We started a fire and then went down to the South Saskatchewan River to swim and play in the water. It was sunny and warm with no wind. At about 1 p.m., it was decided that we would make our way down the winding path to our campsite, which was about 150 yards away. Eager to get a hot dog on a stick, I ran ahead of everyone else. About 75 yards down the path, I was jogging when I suddenly smelled a strong odor. I stopped, and it smelled like a freshly washed dog that had rolled around in garbage for a week. I heard a light rustle to the right, and as I turned to look, I saw a large black and red furred back of something facing away from me to the west. I could hear the creak about 30 yards ahead of the creature I was looking at. Its butt was a couple inches off the ground. It was hunched forward at some Saskatoon bushes, and it had a cone-shaped head that seemed to be sitting on its shoulders. It was about 4 feet wide at the shoulders and about 5 feet high. It made no sound or movement, but when I thought to myself, what am I looking at? I was answered by a thought of, you don't see me, I'm not here. I wondered what I was looking at again, and again I got the same response. Suddenly it quietly muttered a chattering sound, and when I heard it, the thought of get out of here now entered my head. Without hesitation, I started running towards the campsite, and as I did, I could hear a heavy thump, thump, thump sound running towards the creek, and the sound of bushes being crunched. When everyone else got back, I asked if they had seen or heard it, which no one had. I was told it must be a bear, but I said it didn't look or act like any bear I ever saw. Then, a friend said I must have seen a Sasquatch, and everyone laughed. I asked, what is a Sasquatch, as I had never heard or seen the Patterson-Gimlin film. When they told me what it was, I said that it was probably what I saw, and everyone laughed again. I started to read and learn as much as I could about them. I forgot to mention that the Sasquatch was about 30 feet away, with an unobstructed view. Number 2, Pullman sighting. Alberta is one of the best places in Canada to go hunting, if that is an activity that you enjoy. There is a variety of wildlife and strict rules in place to ensure that none of the animals are over-hunted. However, you can't get tags to hunt a Sasquatch, which is probably for the best, as this hunter found out when he was making his way up a mountain and came face to face with an animal he wasn't expecting. This is his story. I was hunting 19 kilometers north of Coleman, Alberta. It was late afternoon, early evening. I moved up the mountain, following a game trail through some heavy brush, tracking some elk in the area, and I came upon what I thought was a very large black bear in the brush, about 30 feet ahead of me. It stood up on 2 legs and turned to look at me when I realized it was not a bear, but a large, heavy-set animal with a black face and no snout, ape-like in appearance. It looked surprised but not scared of me. It backed away from me and disappeared up the slope rapidly and reappeared short about 150 feet up the slope. It looked down at me and called at me with a weird screech that made my hair stand up. It then quickly disappeared up the slope. I tried to go up a little farther, but the slope was very steep, and I couldn't figure out how it was able to move up the hill so quickly. Shortly afterwards, a bunch of bighorn sheep came stampeding down the slope from where the thing had gone. They looked terrified, but ran right past me in their haste. I decided to join them and made my way back, looking over my shoulder the whole way. I could have shot it, but I honestly didn't know what it was. I did not return to the area last fall because I am no longer comfortable hunting in that area. I haven't told anyone, but I found one of your posters in Kananaskis, and I thought that I should at least tell you guys about it. I'm an engineer in Calgary, so I do not want my customers to think that I am a kook, but I know what I saw, and it wasn't a bear or someone in a suit. It was a real animal, and I think it was a Sasquatch. Number 1, a log driver's waltz. When driving on the roads, it is important to pay attention so you can avoid objects that are thrown at your vehicle, whether it be garbage, rocks, or even giant logs being thrown at you by a cryptid, as this motorist learned in our next story. Driving north on the existing right-of-way, off to the right and part way up the mountainside was a staging area for logs, pre-cut to length and stacked, awaiting pickup. The beginning of the slope slope uphill was approximately 100 feet from our truck. The logs were staged about 200 feet up the mountainside. Keeping in mind that as you look up the mountainside, the staged logs become further away from the truck, left of center. These logs weren't overly large in diameter, but I would estimate them at 8 to 12 inches. The vehicle was traveling at roughly 15 kilometers an hour. The weather was slightly overcast with a light mist of rain. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a log descending from the staging area to my right and being propelled towards us and the truck, passing through the air in front of us and landing off to the left, only feet from us as we passed by. The log appeared to be launched as opposed to falling off the stack. It would be impossible to fly through the air in the distance it did without some momentum behind it. At this point, I accelerated and removed myself as quickly as possible from the area. Not knowing if this is a hot spot for sightings or not, most likely this just becomes another story without verification. I cannot state that this would be a Sasquatch or Bigfoot incident, but I know of nothing else that could possibly throw a log and project it at my vehicle from that distance. The added elevation could make it possible for the log to travel that distance. I have made mention of this incident to other organizations in the past, but did not follow up with any requests. Today, I am retired to verify the elevations and distance of which I am referring. I should also mention that the log flew through the air like a spear. It did not tumble end over end.
Number 5. Snow Wasset. Coming up first on our list of icy cold little critters is the Snow Wasset, a fearsome legless little cryptid and a local one to boot, so I had to include it. Anything that comes from the greater Canada area is a big deal for me. It winters by the Great Lakes in the Hudson Bay, and in the rest of the year crawls up to Newfoundland and Labrador. Totally the wrong time of year, buddy. You gotta go to Newfoundland in the winter for Jig's dinner. Anyway, a Snow Wasset is like a weasel. It's a long, furry creature, except it has no legs. Except in the summertime, where it does have legs and also turns green. If I was a biologist, I would love to get my hands on this thing and figure that out. That particular part of the lore of this creature is really fascinating to me. Why would a creature shed its legs like baby teeth? What cruel joke of evolution is that? It's like a mammal sandworm. Anyway, I gotta move on. When it's in its legless, winterized form, it burrows deep beneath the snow and ambushes its prey by surprise and drags them into the frozen underground. Absolutely horrifying. A frozen, legless, furry little snake is not pleasant by any definition. A wasset is said to be 4 times as large as a wolverine and 40 times as hungry, requiring a vast amount of meat to keep it sustained. Doesn't shed enough calories shedding those legs. I'm sorry, I don't know why I'm so hung up about this, my ghouls, but I am. Maybe it's because there's not actually that much information about the Snow Wasset out there. Sightings and stories about it date back mostly hundreds of years, and there haven't been too much buzz about them ever since. Perhaps they're extinct. Or perhaps they've all just burrowed under too deep where I can't see them. Either way, the only thing that really stood out for me is they turn green and have no legs, so I'm gonna keep banging on that. And hey, when it's this cold outside, what do you really need to go out for? Stay inside, order some food, turn the heat up, and keep watching Top 5 Scary for the rest of the night. And while you're there, maybe think about tossing a subscribe your way if it's not too much trouble. Number 4, the Nucklavi. Coming up next on this list is the Nucklavi, a cryptid that I had never heard of before researching for this video, so I hope it's new to you too and you get to learn something cool. The Nucklavi is an old Nordic myth, a demon of the sea appearing as a horrifying demonic, part horse, part man, part thing hybrid. Seriously, this thing is disgusting. It looks like somebody glued a bunch of leftover horse parts and man parts together, and it's completely skinless, leaving its exposed flesh to all the elements to see. Kinda looks like one of those behind the scenes videos of how they make McDonald's chicken nuggets, you know? The Nucklavi is said to be trapped in the sea during the warmer months of the year, and then come winter is set free to wreak all kinds of havoc. This thing is pure evil, destroys just by breathing. The horsey head part emits toxic fumes just by opening its wretched maw, and this vapor causes crops to wilt, people to fall ill, and drought soon follows after. I see why they keep this thing locked up for most of the year, because it kinda sounds like a royal nuisance. It's thought that the Nucklavi was first created by old Nordic storytellers as a way of rationalizing and explaining away things like drought and plague destroying the harvest. It's much easier to put a face to your problems, and when that problem is a wretched flayed horseman, it's easy to get angry at that. When stories of the Nucklavi were told, it was thought to be so evil that its name was always said in a hushed whisper for fears of speaking too loudly of it could attract its attention. Oh, I wish I knew that about 2 minutes ago. I just said its name like 16 times very loudly. It's said that if you were ever to encounter the dread Nucklavi to find the nearest fresh body of water, this sickly creature of the sea is deathly afraid of fresh water, I guess. You'd think a creature with all that skin exposed wouldn't like salt water or the cold, but hey, there you go, to each their own. You do you, terrifying skinless monster horseman. Number 3, a Chenu. A Chenu is an Algonquin creature of folklore a bit similar to a Wendigo, but with some fun regional twists. While both creatures hunt in wooded northern areas, and are both commonly associated with the wintertime, a Wendigo is usually depicted as a stretched out, emaciated monster monster, whereas a Chenu is depicted as being massive, very furry, and only getting larger and larger the more it eats. Actually, reading that back now, I realize that's not terribly impressive. Most things get larger and larger as they eat. Much like a Wendigo though, a Chenu is thought to have been formerly a man who was turned into a beast, either through their greedy ways, refusing to feed the starving, or for those who give in to the darkest of temptations and consume human flesh willingly. A Chenu is described as looking like a cross between an old man and a beast, large and imposing in appearance, with big chunks of their own flesh missing, possibly self-inflicted. They cover themselves in the forest, hiding themselves with leaves, bark, snow, pine needles, until they look like a horrible lint roller of the woods that walks upright. Interestingly, unlike a Wendigo, it's thought that the process of turning into a Chenu can actually be reversed. There's some good news. In some folk tales, the way to cure a Chenu is a special medicine that can cause them to vomit up their frozen heart and vomit up the flesh that they've consumed, causing the afflicted to revert back to their human form in a sight that is no doubt disgusting for everybody. But if this isn't possible, if you don't have this medicine on hand, or it's just not feasible to trick a Chenu, you can also get it to eat salt, which will apparently melt it from the inside. Poor Chenu. You're forced to live a tormented existence as a snow monster, isolated from your former friends, doomed to hunt on your former species, consuming only the darkest meat available, and you can't even order a little bit of salt for your dinner, eating a totally flavorless diet. I got nothing but sympathy for you, Chenu. Number 3, Kamataichi. I think it's really fascinating what each culture's cryptids look like, you know? Each culture creates cryptids and they all put their fun little spins on it, and whenever I get to make these videos, I learn all sorts of really cool mythological stuff that I'd never heard of before, and I sincerely hope you get that out of these videos too. I'd never heard of this next one, the Kamataichi, but I am obsessed with it now. Coming to us from Japan, this yokai, which is like a Japanese type of demon, appears like a weasel except with razor sharp sickle-like claws, like a real-life Sneasel from Pokemon. I'm actually amazed there's no Pokemon directly based on a Kamataichi. They seem like perfect for it. They have spiny fur, similar to a hedgehog, like prickly little needles, but they bark like a dog, and their claws could not be any sharper, and they're sickle-shaped. And also, a lot of depictions of them are downright adorable. These funny little creatures are extremely lightweight and have learned how to ride the currents of the wind to travel. They honestly sound kind of like radical in like a California surfer way. The legends of the Kamataichi come out of the Chubu region of Japan, when vicious cold winds were so powerful they would cut people down directly. And these legends would take the form of the spirit called the Kamataichi, which was the winds themselves as this furry little miscreant. It would attack at your legs, causing you to fall down, exposed and helpless, while it sucked at your blood. It's said that no blood occurs from their woundings because of this, as a Kamataichi moves so quickly and sucks it all up. That's almost considerate of it, doesn't leave a stain. These creatures move so quickly, and they're so good at hiding, that they're apparently completely invisible to the naked eye, appearing as nothing more than a sharp, freezing wind on your skin. Amusingly, there's some debate as to whether or not a Kamataichi's true origin is actually nothing more than a silly pun. There's a stance samurai would use called a kamaitachi, translating loosely to sword stance, which would explain, you know, it's a sharp thing. I don't know where the stance comes in, but it's sharp. However, there are legends all throughout Japan, throughout many regions, all telling stories of creatures that ride the wind and attack humans, and the sickle weasel remains among the most popular and among the most adorable. Sorry, Kamataichi, you are just so cute. If anybody knows where to get like a stuffed toy of this little guy, please comment under the video. I need to know. Number 1, the Yeti. Coming in at the number 1 spot, a mainstay of any trip to the mountain, the Yeti. I mean, who else could possibly take the number 1 spot on a list about winter cryptids? Maybe Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. Does he count as a cryptid? I guess he was. Maybe he's more like a mutant. Anyway, a Yeti is an American manufacturer specializing in outdoor products such as ice coolers, vacuum insulated drinkware, and I'm reading the wrong one. Sorry. Let's do that again. A Yeti refers to an ape-like creature thought to live in the mountains in the Himalayas, standing upright like a man and walking on 2 legs, and is usually pretty big, like 8 feet tall, with long arms, broad feet, and long brownish hair and sunken eyes. It kind of sounded a bit like me, to be honest. While it's pretty common to draw a Yeti as just being like a big giant white gorilla, they're actually pretty different, and most traditional depictions of a Yeti color it with darker fur. They're probably one of the oldest cryptids out there that's still talked about so fondly, with stories of Yetis going all the way back to 326 BC, when Alexander the Great sought out to capture one to see for himself while he was conquering the Indus Valley, although he was told that no Yeti could survive at an altitude low enough to meet meet him. And Alexander wept, for there were no more Yetis left to conquer. It's got several names. It's sometimes called a Sasquatch, or in the West it's popularly referred to as an abominable snowman, although that's a term by British officers who were stationed in the Himalayas, as no natives to the regions call it that. The name Yeti possibly comes from the Tibetan words Yete, meaning a man-like animal, or from Meti, meaning bear in some Nepalese and Tibetan dialects, which would make a good bit of sense, as it's thought that a number of Yeti sightings over the years that led to it being such a widely recognized cryptid could actually just be bear sightings being mistaken in the frosty air. In fact, there's a theory that Yeti sightings are from hybrid polar bears that had bred with grizzly bears, which has been recorded to happen, just not really anywhere where Yeti sightings are really made, so kinda up in the air. In Sherpa tradition, it's said that a Yeti is a powerful, mystical being, and a Yeti can choose to whom it will make itself visible to, choosing to only appear to those who believe in it. So if you're ever trekking the Himalayas and worried about an attack, here's a little advice for you: just don't believe in it. Although there are a good number of people who believe that the Yeti are an intelligent enough species that just want to be left alone to their own devices, living peacefully in the mountains.
Kicking off at number 5, the Loveland Frogmen. Hailing from the misty swamps and vast wetlands of rural Ohio, the Loveland Frogmen, also affectionately known as the Loveland Lizards, are a cryptid unlike no other and have reportedly appeared under several bizarre circumstances on a regular basis in Ohio's Clermont County. Allegedly, the first sightings of these eerie bipedal amphibians first occurred in 1955 and has proven to be one of the most intriguing cryptozoological mysteries in North America. The creatures themselves allegedly live in the temperate forests and wetlands of Clermont County and are able to survive the cold winters of the region without having to hibernate. Useful. During their first sighting at approximately 3:30 AM, a local businessman was driven down a lonely stretch of road, running alongside the Miami River on the outskirts of the small town known as Loveland, Ohio. Suddenly and out of nowhere, the man claimed to have witnessed 3 bipedal quasi-reptilian entities emerge from the dense reeds and begin to congregate by the side of the road. The man slowed down and turned out his lights as he pulled his car up to a curb to observe these creatures further. He claimed that they stood between 3 and 4 feet tall, were covered with leathery skin, and had webbed hands and feet. Their most distinguishing feature though was their distinctly frog-like head, which the man claimed bore deep wrinkles where their hair should have been. Well, since then, over 5 more sightings of the Loveland Frogmen have occurred over a 60-year period. What do you guys think? What's going on, Ohio? Next up at number 4, the nameless thing of Berkeley Square. And I absolutely love this story either way, because if you've ever heard of the famed 50 Berkeley Square in London, England, then you'll know that, cryptid or not, this place is terrifying enough. It's proof as well that there are some cases out there which irk on the realm of the paranormal and become a category so unexplainable that they don't really fit into anything, or can fit into anything. I don't know, it's pretty nebulous. Either way though, the haunted legacy of Berkeley Square has featured ghosts and poltergeists the world over, and it's widely considered to be one of the most haunted places in England. But there is one particular instance that takes the cake: the nameless thing of Berkeley Square. A tale that takes place in 1840 when a 20-year-old Sir Robert Walboys got into a drunken dare in which he had written off Berkeley Square and its paranormal reputation as a whole load of Kaiser Soze. He put money down that he could spend the night in the building's most cursed and haunted second floor, and so the next evening did exactly that, with a pistol in his hand. For robbers, I guess, and a makeshift pulley line attached to a bell in case he saw anything out of the ordinary. He drank a whole load of courage and tried to get some shut-eye, but well, of course, young Bobby Warboy's story cuts out there, when the landlord was awoken by the bell rig ringing incessantly and ran upstairs to check on him. He found Robert Warboys dead as a doornail, slouched in the corner with his eyes bulging in terror. Legend has it that the landlord witnessed an amorphous, shadowy form with slime oozing from it, claws and tentacles and all dripping from its form, suddenly slink back into the shadows of the corner of the room and disappear. And since then, tales of the nameless thing of Berkeley Square are more common than any of us would actually like. Swinging in at number 3, the Kinderhook Blob, which is just a great name, really, isn't it? And if I'm being honest, the legend of the Kinderhook Blob is exactly what cryptid tales are made of, so strap in. It's sometime in 1962 New York, and on 6 separate occasions, multiple witnesses encountered a floating, mysterious blob-like creature that was so terrifying in its form that 2 men armed with shotguns fled in terror. The initial encounter was from a 10-year-old boy named Hallenbeck and his 7-year-old cousin Chari. They were playing in the dense woods nearby their house when all of a sudden they both heard this really high-pitched whistle noise, and suddenly Recently, from behind a nearby pine tree, they witnessed a white amorphous object appear in full view, which slowly began writhing toward them. On 5 more occasions, which insanely would happen over the next 12 years, all the way until 1978, dozens of eyewitnesses would explain in vivid detail similar accounts of an amorphous white blob-like creature that would emerge from the woods, often attaching its tendrils to trees whilst incessantly making its way towards its victims, causing them to flee in terror. So much so that on one occasion 2 grown men tried blowing it to pieces with shotguns to no avail and then turned tail and ran. What I love about this story is the essence of a cryptid tale. For all intents and purposes, the Kinderhook blob could be a disused weather balloon floating listlessly through the air, but because it was seen multiple times by multiple people in the right setting, the legend of the terrifying white blob quickly became a horrifying reality. Either that or it's a sentient alien life form that's going to consume us all, so yeah. Coming in next at number 2, the disappearance of Peter Grayson. The Groot slang, or the Groot slang, which in Afrikaans loosely translates to big snake, is a legendary creature widely considered to be one of the continent's most prolific cryptids, and is reputed to dwell exclusively in the deep caves and cavernous systems in the Richtersveld, South Africa. According to legend, the Groot slang is a primordial creature that is reputedly as old as the world itself and dwells within what locals refer to as the bottomless pit, which also, conveniently enough, is also filled with precious diamonds. Well, diamonds historically have a proficiency of attracting daring adventurers, and one of those adventurers just so happened to be an English businessman known as Peter Grayson. In 1917, Grayson and a team of excavators began an expedition into the Richtersveld cave system, accompanied by several local guides. After heading out into the rocky desert landscape, and upon hearing that Grayson intended to descend into the bottomless pit, unwittingly the lair of the Groot slang, the local guides quickly left after warning Grayson that they'd lost friends and family to the violent serpent before, and they weren't going to do it again. He shrugged it off and alongside his 2 excavators headed deep into the cave, and well, that's the last that they heard of any of them. The Grayson dynasty faded into obscurity after their patriarch was never seen alive again, but as the legend goes, one of the local guides returned to the cave a day or so later after feeling guilty for abandoning Grayson and his team. At the entrance of the cave, he found the body of an excavator, half of his body actually, to be specific. His legs and most of his torso had been ripped clean off, and he died attempting to crawl back out. What a way to go. And finally, coming in at our number 1 spot, the legend of Yuri Grando. And I just have to tell this cryptid story because it's one of my favourites, and it's also considered to be one of the first historical instances of vampirism. As the legend goes, Yuri Grando Aljovic was a villager and poor peasant from the region of Istria, which now makes up modern day Croatia. Historically, he was referred to as a strigoi, strigon or strigun, a local word for something that resembles a vampire and a warlock. Sometime around 1656, Yuri died due to an unknown illness, but according to legend, he regularly returned from the grave at night as a vampire to terrorize his village until his decapitation in 1672. The legend tells that for 16 years after his death, Yuri would rise from his grave by night and terrorize the village. The village priest Giorgio, who had buried Yuri 16 years previously, discovered that at night somebody would knock on the doors around the village, and on whichever door he knocked, someone from that house would die within the next few days. Eventually, the villagers rallied after witnesses saw the corpse of Yuri roaming the streets, and led by the town's mayor, chased and tried to kill him with a hawthorn stick, but failed to pierce his supernatural flesh. The next night, 9 people went to the graveyard and dug up Yuri's coffin, finding a perfectly preserved corpse with a smile on its face. It was Yuri with pristine white flesh and no signs of decomposition. They tried to stake him once more, but witnesses noted that the stick would not penetrate its flesh. Eventually, the villagers were so terrified and kind of fed up with his vampire antics that a brave villager known as Stipan Milicic took a saw and decapitated the corpse. As soon as it tore Yuri's skin, the vampire screamed and blood began gushing from the cut. Allegedly, a man that was presumed dead for 16 years. Yeah. That one's pretty worrying, right? Kicking off at number 5, the Silver Woman. And this story comes from a police motorway patrol woman from Portsmouth, England, who explains that her career regularly confronts her with situations that are both bizarre and unnerving. But this one kind of takes the cake. On the 25th of November around 6:30 PM during a routine speed camera set up in the Portsmouth city centre, her speed trap began picking up random tracings of non-existent objects in pitch black darkness, hurtling past her vehicle at around 30 to 40 miles per hour. Now, I know what you might be thinking, the device was obviously malfunctioning, but that wasn't the case, and our police officer had already thought of that. She trained the camera manually back onto the road surface to see what had been picked up, and she was shocked to discover that on the screen was what could only be described as humanoid figures running up and down the street at about 40 feet ahead of the vehicle. Strangely enough, they seemed to have a silver appearance to them, almost shimmering and translucent. She looked out of the window and again, nothing was there, but when she looked back at the screen, about 10 feet away from the vehicle was one of the same silvery entities standing motionless, facing away from the van, hulking and breathing in a strange fashion, as if they were weighing up taking on the police officer. What were they? Well, we'll never know, and when she played the tape back for her fellow officers, the silvery entities were nowhere to be seen. Yeah, I've got no clue about this one. Coming in at number 4, the folk monster. Now, Bigfoot is obviously the heavy hitter of the cryptid world. People have devoted their entire lives to hunting down the elusive mountain creature, stretching all the way across the wildlands of North America, as well as similar instances across the planet. But there is one little town in America that seems to be the hotspot for these sightings: Folk, Arkansas, and in 1971 it became the scene of its most terrifying legend. Meet Bobby Ford, a man who vehemently claims he's seen Bigfoot, or a version of it, describing it as 7 feet tall, ridiculously fast and covered in long brown hair. And he saw it up close and personal. It was a Saturday when Bobby and his brother were out hunting a short distance from their rural home when they heard screams in the distance. Bobby's wife, Elizabeth Ford, was frozen in horror when a creature reached through the front window, massive and hairy with glowing red eyes that made no sound except for heavy breathing. When Bobby and his brother ran back to the home, the creature turned and grabbed him as he sprinted up to the porch. It tackled him to the ground with ease and then disappeared into the woodland. The creature had left behind clear tracks in the house and nearby area, 3-toed footprints that matched the deep 3-fingered scratches that were made in the wood of the front porch. Bobby Ford was rushed to hospital and treated for minor wounds and shock, and the family were so terrified by the encounter that they moved out. They'd only lived there a week. That's terrible timing. Next up at number 3, the Grey Man of Ben Macdui. Ben Macdui in Gaelic, Mountain of the Son of Duff, is an awe-inspiring peak of the Scottish Highlands, staking the claim as one of Britain's highest mountains and the highest of the Cairngorms National Park. It's been scaled by countless people throughout history, but there are those that claim that there's something more sinister living out on the mountain: the Grey Man of Ben Macdui, and it doesn't like visitors. The creature is said to be at least 20 feet tall, and one eyewitness of the creature's presence, a respected professor and mountain climber named Norman Colley, said that he was first aware of something following him during his ascent after hearing strange footsteps behind him. Alone, isolated on the mountain, something was following him. And it wasn't human. The footsteps were laborious and delayed, as if that whatever was following him was much, much taller than he was. When he saw it, he described the Grey Man as vaguely human-shaped, brown in hue and fur, and shrouded in a strange grey mist. In 1945, a similar thing happened to a renowned mountain climber named Peter Densham, who described the exact same encounter with the exact same creature. Again, in 1958, the Scots magazine wrote of a similar account from naturalist Alexander Tunion, who this time found himself armed with a rifle and fired several rounds into the Grey Man. He thought he'd hit it, whatever it was, but after trekking over through the snow, found no sign of the creature. It vanished away like fog rolling across a mountain, and the mystery of the Grey Man of Ben Macdui remains unsolved. Swinging in at number 2, the Cabbagetown Tunnel Monster, which is an urban legend from my current stomping grounds of Toronto, Ontario, that is grounded in such bizarre circumstances that it remains a warning not to go wandering through the dark tunnels of downtown Toronto. I'm talking about the path. Ever. Don't go there. In 1978, in the eastern Cabbagetown district of Toronto, a 51-year-old man known as Ernest had a terrifying encounter in the network of tunnels that sprawl beneath the city. He had been out searching the neighborhood for a missing kitten that him and his wife had been raising when he stumbled across a tunnel entrance and decided to explore. After venturing 10 feet into the gloom, Ernest suddenly came across a creature that looked somewhat like a long, thin monkey, around 3 feet in height, with large teeth and covered in grey fur. It had unsettling eyes, he described, that peered out of the darkness in a bright orange hue. Even more unsettling, Ernest claimed that the creature spoke to him. "Go away, "Go away," it said in a hissing voice before slinking down a tunnel off onto the side. Ernest was reluctant to come forward with his story. He was a respected member of the community and he feared that he'd be ridiculed by his peers, but after being convinced by a friend, he spoke to the Toronto Sun, and a group of journalists and investigators followed him into the same tunnel. Although they didn't see the creature, they did see that the narrow tunnel led to a strange, gloomy chasm that dropped into the unseen sewer system below. And even stranger, they found the maimed, half-eaten carcass of a cat buried loosely beneath the dirt and debris. It permeated the legend of the Cabbagetown Tunnel Monster, and whatever it was, we may never know for sure. Just stay away.
Number 5, Kamataichi. I love doing videos and lists like these ones because I get to spend a lot of time researching into these different cultures and cryptids I never really would have known about without these opportunities. So thanks for watching stuff like this so I can keep on doing them. That's my greedy reason behind it. I just like learning. Our first cryptid from the land of the rising sun is going to be the Kamataichi. This yokai appears as a weasel with razor sharp sickle-like claws. If you're a Pokemon head, big Pokemon fan, Sneasel from 2nd Gen, the Dark Ice type, he's based on a Kamataichi. They've got spiny fur, similar to a hedgehog, and they bark like a dog, and they have razor sharp claws. These adorable, funny little guys are extremely lightweight, lighter than the wind itself even, and as such, travel by gusts of wind soaring through the sky like they're radical, furry little windsurfers. Legends of the Kamataichi first came about in the Chubu region of Japan, notorious for its icy sharp winds that were so powerful they would blow men over. These legends then took the form of the Kamataichi, the winds literally personified as this little vermin miscreant. It attacks you in the legs and it knocks you over. You're all exposed and helpless while it picks away at your vitals with its little sickle hands. These creatures are surgical when they strike. A Kamataichi sucks away and feeds on any of the gore left behind by their wounds. These creatures are said to be totally stealthy, impossible to see with the naked eye, and blend into their surroundings well. And here's some pedantic little wordplay trivia. I know all the kids at home love pedantic wordplay trivia. There's some debate as to whether or not Kamataichi's name is nothing more than a cheesy pun. There's a stance that old sword fighters in Japan would use called Kamataichi, translating loosely to sword stance, and well, you can see if you just literally squish those two sounds together. And if you're looking for way more cryptid content, creepy tales, true stories, fake stories, aliens, conspiracies, horror movies, and basically just about everything weird and freaky that could possibly happen on this world, Top 5 Scary is the place to be. So hit subscribe, ring that bell when you do, and stay scared. But also stay watching this video, okay? Nothing I love more than seeing you guys watch them all the way to the end. Now let's keep going. Number 4, Teke Teke. Coming in next is gonna be a fairly newer urban legend, but it gripped me so much I had to include it in this. It's the Teke Teke. Teke Teke is a legend about the ghost of a student who was slain when she fell onto a railway line, where she was then split in half by a train. No easy way to say that, might as well just get it out of the way. Much like an Onryo, which, hold on to that thought for now, we're gonna come back to that in a minute. She's a vengeful spirit of a wronged woman who lurks train stations at night stalking out for her victims. She drags herself across the ground using her arms, dragging the spine sticking out of her torso, scraping across the ground, making a horrifying ticka 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 sound from where she gets her name. And you thought that was just like a cute little sounding name, didn't you? Nope. Try if you can. Just try to get the mental image out of your head of a ghost girl clawing along on just her hands and elbows and her spine following along behind her. She's also carrying a giant sickle with her, so there's that too. She's really not much of a farmer, so I'll tell you right now, she's not using that for crops. If she finds you, Teke Teke will chase you and slice you in half. Whoops. Some variations say that she only takes your legs, which I guess is better, but really not by much. There's a specific variation of the legend that gives Teke Teke a bit more backstory for her origin, saying her name is Kashima Raiko, and she's a specific entity. She died when her legs were severed from her body, and the next part gets a bit creepy, so you might want to grab onto something, maybe put a little salt circle around your computer. It's said that when an individual learns of Kashima's story, she'll appear to you within the next month. So start timing now, I guess. Kashima Raiko is said to haunt bathroom stalls asking where her legs have gone. If you answer in a way she doesn't approve of, she'll take them from you. Incredibly bizarrely, most of all, this isn't the only bathroom themed horror story on this list, and I'm not joking, so we'll talk about that in a minute, but in the meantime sit tight and wait what I could possibly mean. Number 3, Kamakiri. Something I really like about reading about Japanese yokai and their mythological monsters when you read about a bunch of them is that they tend to kind of fall into 2 categories, you know? It's either the most terrifying thing thing I have ever heard in my life. A story of a malevolent spirit that's been wronged and will haunt you and do something unspeakable for a painful death, or they're just like weird little goblins. They're like weird little ghouls that go around doing silly little things. The kamakiri is one of the silliest little demons I have ever read about, so that's why I'm including them, because they're hilarious. A kamakiri looks like a weird little bird, like a little bird monster, with a razor sharp beak and very pointed claws. They're teeny tiny and very sneaky to move undetected. So what does the dreaded kamakiri do? Are you ready for this? Hold on to something, because this is going to terrify you. It breaks into your house at night and it cuts your hair. They hide in your roof and they wait at night for the perfect moment to strike, and then they go in and they just mess up your perfect do. They layer it all weird. They cut the ends right off. They frost your tips, and they go after anyone, okay? They're not picky. If you've got a head of hair, they want to snip it up. Only the baldies are safe now. They wait until you're asleep, and if you're wondering, you're just sitting there like, why would anyone tell a story about this monster? Why would anyone make this up? It was in periods of Japanese history when long hair was really the only fashion and accepted hairstyle. I would have done great. So the idea of a nobleman having his hair cut in the middle of the night was like spine chilling. These days though, it just makes kamakiri sound like he's like a college prankster than it does a real monster. But that's only half of why I thought this creature was so funny. Aside from the split end touch-ups, a kamakiri cutting your hair is said to be a sign that the victim is about to unknowingly marry a yokai. Shapeshifters like Yorigumo or Kitsune can trick young men into marriage. So the kamakiri steps in and he cuts your hair to let you know you might accidentally end up marrying a demon spider shapeshifter woman. And I just got paid to say that sentence out loud. We made it, ma. Kamakiri, you might win the top 5 scary award for one of the funniest cryptids we've ever talked about on the channel. A solid number 2 compared to my true favorite, Akaname, the demon that comes into your bathroom and eats waste, which I guess would make him number 2. That's the rudest joke I'll ever tell on this channel. I'm so sorry. You guys can cut that if you want. Okay, moving on. Number 2, Akamanto. The Akamanto, also known as the Red Cloak, is a masked spirit and may very well be one of the most evil, weird creatures I've ever heard described in folklore, so just wait till you get a load of this. Not like any good folktale, there are some local variations in how Akamanto operates, but the elements that remain consistent across all tales are that the Akamanto preys on you during your most personal moments. You know, he tends to come for kings who sit on a porcelain throne. He visits you in the smallest room in the house. He catches you with your pants down. This demon comes for you when you're on the toilet, if that isn't quite getting across yet. I didn't know how to just say it. The Akamanto then offers you a deadly choice. Pulls a little matrix on you and it asks you to choose between red toilet paper or blue toilet paper. Kind of like that one scene from Squid Games with the guy offering the paper. Actually, a little funny trivia, the creator of Squid Games confirmed this monster is what inspired that scene. So a little symbolism about that you didn't know about before, and now you do. Now, it's all a trick question, of course. Neither of the toilet papers this ghastly spirit has for you are anything like the Royale kittens. The red paper means you'll find yourself all cut up, leaving behind quite a mess. And the blue option means you'll be left gasping for air, clean, but slow and painful. The only way to escape the Akamanto's dreaded game is to tell him you've got enough, actually, and thanks for asking, but you're good. No, really, you just have to ignore him and tell him you're good, or flush quick and hightail it out of there. You know, don't play it smart with him. Don't ask him for purple. Don't ask him for sandpaper. No wise guy answers. He's a toilet paper demon. He doesn't want to hear any of that. It's said that if you mess with him, you mess with the Akamanto, he drags you feet first into the underworld. At least he doesn't flush you. Why did they make that? Why did the backstory behind the toilet paper demon? I do not know. Okay, number 1, Onryo. And our number 1, I went with the Onryo. And Onryo translates almost literally to a vengeful spirit, and in every definition of the words, that statement rings true. They're also sometimes called hatred spirits, because an Onryo is specifically a ghost of someone who is capable of causing grievous harm to the living. Onryo are almost always depicted as women who were wronged in their life. They're not exclusively women, but majority of them are. They were traumatized by their death, and they spend the rest of their days exacting revenge. God forbid women do anything fun, huh? Nailing down exactly what an Onryo is capable of is difficult, because there are so many countless interpretations of the vengeful spirit, but just know at home that nothing good ever comes out of crossing an Onryo. You can expect things like sleep paralysis, telekinesis, curses, evil magic, like I said, really nothing good. It's worth noting that as part of the legend of an Onryo, her vengeance can never be satisfied, no matter how many enemies she fells in her wake. An Onryo will go after her lovers, family, whoever she had the most lingering pain paying for. And after she's done with that, well, she'll just attack indiscriminately. You gotta do something with the day, right? Onryo are a very traditional Japanese story, popping up in a lot of performance art pieces like No, Kabuki, and Rakugo, and they even continue to be the center stage in modern works. Probably the most famous Onryo I think most Westerners would know about is Sadako Yamamura from The Ring, otherwise known as Samura if you only saw the American version, and if you have, you gotta fix that at some point for me, okay? And Onryo traditionally is described as wearing a white barrio kimono. She's got wild, unkempt, long black hair obscuring her face, and in stage plays with dramatic white and blue paint, so she looks like the girl from The Ring, basically. And how does one stop an Onryo? Oh, you don't. Yeah, there's nothing. Once she's coming for you, she's coming for you. So, you know, be nice. Just be nice to the ladies in your life and hope that they never come back as vengeful revenge spirits. Number 5, the Fresno Nightcrawlers. Starting off the list is going to be my favorite cryptids in the whole wide world, the Fresno Nightcrawler. If you've never seen footage of them, it's going to change your life. Look at them. Look at the way they stride around like a pair of pants that came to life. These things are the absolute perfect cryptid to me. There's never been a story of them hurting anything or anyone. There's no livestock that goes missing when the Nightcrawlers are around. It's just some chill dudes going for a late night stroll. I can really get down with the lifestyle that the Fresno Nightcrawlers are about. The Nightcrawlers were first spotted in Fresno, California, which makes a lot of sense why they're called that. They've been mostly spotted in California almost exclusively, a couple times, save for one reported sighting in Poland, so must have been a pretty long walk they were going on. The first recorded sighting was by a man in Fresno named Jose, who claimed that during the night he heard his dogs freaking out at something outside. He went to go see what his dogs were making so much noise about, and through a security camera system in his home, he saw the two little crawlers making their way around. He woke up his brother to come watch the footage as well, but by the time he'd awoken, the creature was already gone. The next morning, they called in investigators to inspect the lawn and the footage, but there was absolutely no trace of anything. No footprints, no spots, nothing. All they had was grainy CCTV footage of the Nightcrawlers making their way down the lawn. Since their sighting, there's been endless debate as to just what the Nightcrawlers are. Some suspect spirits or ghosts, because they do look kind of spectral in the video, but a number of people have also put forward the idea that the Nightcrawlers could be visitors from another world. They don't look like anything on this planet, so maybe they came down. Who's to say? The only person who can truly decide is you. And hey, if you want to see loads more videos of things what might be cryptids or what might be aliens, then you already know the vibe. It's Top 5 Scary. We got more videos of cryptids and aliens that you could ever watch, but you're welcome to try. Stay subscribed and don't miss a scream. Number 4, the Enfield Horror. The Enfield Horror is a pretty notable cryptid in American history, and it gets its name from a small string of sightings when it terrorized the town of Enfield, Illinois. The creature has been described as a small, goblin-esque being. Oh, you know how I feel about goblins. It doesn't really resemble any living animals on this planet that it could very easily be described as. It's reported as having 3 legs and leathery skin and moving in a vaguely monkey-esque way compared to a baboon hopping around. So the first time the Enfield Horror was ever spotted, it was in 1973 by one Henry McDaniel. He and his wife had been out that night and were returning home and were greeted by their children. The kids had told their father that there was something they'd seen outside that was trying to get inside the house by scratching on the door. Mr. McDaniel initially assumed it was probably just a cat or a dog, but later on during the night, that peculiar scratching came back again at the front door. He went out to shoo the animal away and was shocked at what he saw. He described to police that it had 3 legs on it, a short body, 2 little short arms, and 2 pink eyes as big as flashlights. It stood 4.5 feet tall and was grayish colored, and it was trying to get into their house. McDaniel saw this weird little thing and thought best to rid the world of it and fired at it. He claims he struck the creature, telling police that, "When I fired that first shot, I know I hit." He says the creature hissed at him, claiming that it sounded like a wildcat hissing, and then proceeded to bound away in long leaps across the yard. The next day, police were alerted to the story and sent over to investigate the yard as to what happened. They didn't find much, but they did find 3-footed tracks throughout the yard. So just what on earth was the Enfield Horror? Or is that the operative word? Was it of this earth? Could it have been some animal that had lost a leg and was injured limping around? Or is it something that had slipped out of an enclosure from a UFO and was hopping around our planet? it, looking for a new meal. Coming in at number 3 is the chupacabra, one of the most famous cryptids maybe ever in urban folklore. For those somehow not in the know, the chupacabra is often thought to be a canid-like monster, and is purportedly responsible for disappearances of livestock, predominantly throughout Mexico and the American Southwest, but also propping up in places like Puerto Rico. You know, a chupacabra has been around whenever you find that your livestock has either gone missing or is found dead with all its blood sucked right out. This is actually where the name comes from. While most depictions of the chupacabra almost always define it as being a coyote-like creature, albeit a twisted, mangled looking one, usually described as a totally hairless dog with beady black eyes and a sleek figure, there are some stories and sightings of chupacabras that describe it as being more like a demon or an alien, describing it as being a humanoid creature, often reptilian in nature, walking around on 2 legs and feeding on livestock. In all the years since chupacabras have first been reported, though there are countless sightings, there's never been a fully recovered one that we couldn't explain. Everything that's been found by hunters always ends up turning out to be dogs with mange, being misattributed to being the cryptid. So maybe, is it possible that there's been a giant mix-up, and all the sightings of chupacabras that report them as canines are just that, just sick dogs that get mistaken for looking something weird, and that the real chupacabra is the reptilian, more bipedal sightings that get reported. It could explain why there's never been one recovered, and why livestock keeps going missing under bizarre circumstances. It's even possible that the drained livestock could be creatures that have been recovered to study, abducted under bizarre experiments. Could chupacabras themselves be in a bizarre experiment that's been unleashed into our world? A hybrid chimera breed that was created by alien life and let loose on us to run havoc on us? Number 2, the Dover Demon. The Dover Demon looks outright like an alien, maybe more so than anything else on this list. Its description describes it as a pale, naked, leathery creature with a giant watermelon-esque head and no discernible facial features outside of 2 gigantic eyes. Kinda looks like Roger from American Dad. It looks like the exact depiction of a little gray man. The first ever sighting of the Dover Demon was in 1977 in the small town of Dover, Massachusetts. One Bill Bartlett was driving down the road with his friends late at night, until they saw something bizarre creeping along a low wall of loose stones on the side of the road. Initially, Bartlett assumed that it was just a cat, one of the most often mistaken creatures for cryptids. But as the headlights shone on it, he realized it wasn't like anything he had ever seen. The creature slowly looked up to stare at him, and he described it as having peach-colored skin with a rough texture akin to sandpaper. Not long after initially seeing the Dover Demon, it disappeared almost into thin air. The creature vanished. It's been wondered, actually, by cryptozoologists after this sighting if perhaps the creature had some sort of camouflage ability or some sort of transportation ability even. Given the extreme resemblance to little greys, the alien most commonly described as being the ones responsible for most abductions, could it be possible that the Dover Demon was something scouting out, a creature looking out from above the stars? Could that possibly explain why the creature was able to vanish so quickly? Was it just a remarkably sneaky little fella? Or is it possible that it was technologically advanced in some way, or being backed up by someone else who beamed it on back to whatever ship it came from? And finally, at our number 1 spot is the Flatwoods Monster, a creature that has long since thought to be alien in origin, and not a cryptid as some have said. The Flatwoods Monster was first sighted in West Virginia because of course it was. Everything creepy is in West Virginia. West Virginia is nothing but beautiful, the most picturesque mountains you've ever seen in your life, and horrifying monsters all the way down. John Denver forgot to tell you that part in them songs. The Flatwood Monster was described as being 10 feet tall and roughly 4 feet wide. It's described as being more mechanical in nature than it is organic, kind of a Darth Vader deal going on. Its most notable feature is its giant head with 2 gigantic glowing eyes, described as either bright red or bright green, depending on who's telling the story. And it's got a giant cowl in the shape of a spade behind this big orb, making it look like a big weird alien vampire. Its body was armored with thick vertical pipes, and it's got spindly little arms. The first ever sighting of the Flatwood Monster was in the 50s, 1952 to be specific. 3 boys saw something flailing out of the sky, hitting the ground nearby. The boys went home, and one of them told their mother that they thought they'd seen something fall from the sky, maybe an asteroid, and they wanted some help to go check it out. Always a good idea to ask permission from your mom first if you're gonna go check out an alien. Stranger Things kids would have saved themselves so much trouble if they did that. They gathered a small search party together, you know, just in case, and the group gathered and sought out the farm where the object landed, and eventually made their way to the top of the hill, where they saw a large ball of fire and reported smelling some mist that was making their eyes burn. A person in the search party then noticed that there were two bright glowing green eyes that were floating around in the trees, and he flashed his light to unveil what was hiding in the dark. They were then treated to a full view of the Flatwood Monster in all of its horror. The creature then hissed at them and flew upwards into the night, never to be seen again. Now, over the years, detractors have claimed that the Flatwood Monster could just have been the darkness playing tricks on people's eyes, and that it could have been just a barn owl obscured by shadow. I definitely kind of see that. I see a similar enough face shape. Barn owls are kind of weird looking, but I feel like the size would be hard to misunderstand. Plus, that doesn't really explain off the mist that was making everyone's eyes burn, or the strange thing that fell from the sky. If you ask me, there's a lot more to say the Flatwood Monster is an alien than there is to say it's an owl.
In at number 5, we have the Jersey Devil. Known to exist in the Pine Barrens of New Jersey, the Jersey Devil is often described as having hooves, a snake's tail, bat wings, and a head that looks something like a horse. There have been many sightings throughout history of the Jersey Devil, with the cryptid dating all the way back to the 1700s and continuing on until the past decade. It is said that the Jersey Devil often glows and can breathe fire or poison water with its breath. Throughout folklore, it is also known as the Leeds Devil, with local residents tracing its origins to a woman named Mother Leeds, the mistress of a British soldier who was suspected of being a witch. When she gave birth to her 13th child, she cursed it. The baby was born as a hairy creature and soon began terrorizing the town and its people, even eating children. Now, like I said, there have been many sightings throughout history. On July 27, 1937, an unknown animal with red eyes seen by residents of Downingtown, Pennsylvania, was compared to the Jersey Devil by a reporter for the Pennsylvania Bulletin of July 28, 1937. In 1951, a group of Gibbstown, New Jersey boys claimed to have seen a monster matching the devil's description, and claims of a corpse matching the Jersey Devil's description arose in 1957. Now, many choose to ignore the Jersey Devil, with it thought to be an undiscovered species of animal, generally classified as living pre-pterodactyl. Coming in at number 4, we have Yowie. Yowie, also known as Yehu, Yori, Hairy Man, or Yahoo, is a fanged humanoid creature or great ape featured in Aboriginal mythology along with Australian raptors or Burrinjaw. It is considered to be the Australian Bigfoot and contains many primate-like features, indicating that it is an undiscovered species of great ape. Yowie is described as being one of the most aggressive Sasquatch species and has been reported ripping the heads off of kangaroos and dogs. In the past, it has been described to be around 7 to 9 feet tall, with a large red mouth and talon-like claws according to Aboriginal legends. It is also noted as having 2 large fang-like canines which distinguish the Yowie from the other Bigfoot species. There are around 140 placental mammals known to exist in Australia, most belonging to the order Chiroptera and Rodentia. Some cryptozoologists theorize that the Yowie could be some form of bipedal marsupial, such as a descendant of the New Guinea Hulutherium. Coming in at number 3, we have Mongolian death worm. The Mongolian death worm, also known as its native name, Olgoi korakoi, meaning intestine worm, due to its red blood-like color and size, which is the size of an intestine. It has often been described as around 2 to 7 feet long and possesses the ability to spit out a corrosive yellow saliva and generate blasts of electricity. Mongolian nomads believe the giant worm covers its prey with an acidic substance that turns everything a corroded yellow color. Legend has it that as a creature begins to attack, it raises half of its body out of the sand and starts to inflate until it explodes, releasing the lethal poison all over the victim. It is said that the livestock and humans are its main prey, and because Mongolia had been under Soviet control until 1990, there is very little known about the cryptid. Nobody is entirely sure what the worm actually is, with some experts claiming it to be fake due to the Gobi Desert being too hot an area for annelids to survive. Some have suggested it might be a skink, but they are said to have little legs and scaly skin, whereas witness accounts have specified that the worm is limbless and smooth-bodied. In 2005, an expedition from the Center for Fortean Zoology crossed 1,000 miles of the Gobi on the track of the death worm. They concluded it was likely a large unknown type of worm lizard, and the powers that were attributed to it were apocryphal. Coming in at number 2, we have Ahul. The Ahul, or the Athol, is a winged cryptid often portrayed as a giant bat or even a flying primate depending on the variation. Tales tell of it living in the deepest parts of the jungle of Java and can be found across most of Indonesia. Indonesia. Subspecies can be found on the neighbouring islands of New Guinea in the form of the ropen, a presumed cousin to the ahul. The ropen aptly translates to demon flying and is also said to be a big bat, or more commonly a pterosaur. It is said to produce a light, possibly to attract fish. The ropen is said to have a long snout, large wings, and a long thin crest. It has a distinct face that has features of both a chimpanzee's and a bat's, large dark eyes, red-skinned wings, large claws on its forearms, and is covered in grey fur. It is also noted as having a wingspan of 18 to 28 feet and is said to be the largest bat known to mankind. Now back to the ahuls. They are said to be covered in a thick brown or black fur much like fruit bats, but unlike bats have a long powerful legs and claws and are supposedly capable of pouncing on and snatching up living prey, including humans. Sightings of these winged beasts are often dismissed simply as mistaken glimpses of owls, eagles, and other large birds of prey that inhabit the rainforests. However, many sources can confirm that the beast does in fact exist, and may even be an isolated and undiscovered species. And finally, coming in at number 1, we have Black Shuck. Black Shuck, or Old Shuck, or simply Shuck, is the name given to an unknown creature which is said to roam in East Anglia. It is one of the many ghostly black dogs recorded across the British Isles. The Black Shuck is often recorded as an omen of death, and some occasions a more companionable animal. Although it is classified as a cryptid, there have been various sightings and reports of the animal's appearance throughout the United Kingdom. For centuries throughout England, many have told tales of large black dogs with malevolent flaming eyes are often depicted as red or sometimes green. According to reports, the beast varies in size and stature from that of simply a large dog to being the size of a calf or even a horse. Other accounts report that Black Shuck as floating on a carpet of mist, or even appearing headless. According to folklore, the Shuck haunts East Anglia, primarily coastline, graveyard, side roads, body of water, and dark forest. W.A. Dutt, in his 1901 Highways and Byways in East Anglia, describes the creature, I quote, "He takes the form of a huge black dog and prowls along the dark lanes and lonesome field footpaths where, although his howling makes the hearer's blood run cold, his footfalls make no sound. You may know him at once, should you see him, by his fiery eye. He has but one, and like the Cyclops, is in the middle of his head. But such an encounter might bring you the worst of luck. It is even said that to meet him is to be warned that your death will occur before the end of the year." As I stated before, the Black Shuck has been reported many times, with one of the most notable reports being the appearance at the churches of Bungay and Blyberg in Suffolk. On August 4th, 1957, Black Shuck was said to have burst in through the church doors to a clap of thunder. He ran up to the nave, past a large congregation, killing a man and a boy and causing the church steeple to collapse through the roof. As the dog left, he left scorch marks on the door, which can be seen at the church even to this day.
Number 5, the Dover Demon. Starting off on our list is the cutest cryptid on this list in my opinion, but still a creepy little freak. I like to start with the cute ones to kind of ease you into it. The Dover Demon first appeared in Massachusetts in the town of Dover, lending it its name. It appears as a spindly little demon kind of looking thing that sort of resembles a little gray, the traditional big-eyed aliens that you see everywhere. The Dover Demon is identified by its blank face, its red glowing eyes, and its hunched quadruped stature. The Dover Demon was first recorded in the late 1970s, discovered by 3 teenagers who were driving through Mass when they saw something bizarre being lit up by their headlights. Initially, they didn't think too much of it until they noticed that the creature in front of them looked more like a human than it did an animal. The driver, one Bill Bartlett, described the creature as resembling a baby with elongated arms, tan, sandpaper-like skin, which was coarse looking, and no nose, ears, or mouth to speak of on its bulbous, enlarged head. Bartlett claims that he only got a good look at it for a few seconds before it vanished off into the night. Now, there are some who speculate that the Dover Demon is capable of rendering itself invisible, or camouflaging itself because of the description of this story, and that during daylight it prefers to hide itself in the trees of Dover. Now, bizarrely, I think some skeptics write off the Dover Demon by claiming it was just a baby moose being seen at an odd angle or under strange conditions. And I don't know if I really buy that. I've never seen a baby moose at night in headlights, but I have seen a baby moose. They would have a bulbous head or front-facing eyes, and a baby moose doesn't have that, so I don't know if it's all that. A more pressing question, I think, is if the Dover Demon is a cryptid, cryptid, or perhaps a visitor from another planet, because it does look a lot like the descriptions of the little greys. Now there's a bigger philosophical question there. Are aliens cryptid? Let me know about that in the comments below. And if you like hearing stories about cryptids and aliens, well, I have some great news, my friend. We got loads of cryptid videos on the channel, so get comfy, click through the playlists, and stay subscribed for something new every day. Number 4, Goatman. Up next on our list of cryptids that'll keep you from sleeping is Maryland's own Goatman. Now he might look like Mr. Tumnus, but he isn't going to take you to Narnia anytime soon, and there'll be no Turkish delight in your future. Appearing as a half-human, satiric hybrid, the Goatman is thought to roam around Maryland, but he's been sighted in Louisiana and Texas as well. You know, perhaps he gets bored, perhaps he was taking a tour. The Goatman is said to carry a hatchet with him, and not for hacking any lumber. He's been said to be responsible for missing animals around the wooded areas in Maryland. Now there's a pretty good historical precedent for goats involved in mythology, with satyrs as a mythical historical cryptid, and goats have been associated with Satan and demons for generations. But the Goatman himself has got a pretty rich history in Maryland folklore. Depending on who you ask, he's either just a cryptid goat man who wanders the woods, or if that's not satisfying enough for you, one particularly colorful origin for the goat man is that it's the product of a mad scientist's experiment who was experimenting with goats, and when it went astray, the goat man broke loose and started attacking passersby with an axe. I really like this one, and I choose to believe it's 100% factual. The goat man is a pretty popular folk story with teenagers, with urban legends describing the beast hunting down those who are looking to spend a little quality time at Lover's Lane. It's said he'll come and bleat ya. Bleat, like beat. It's a goat pun. It was pretty bad. Do goats do that, or is this sheep? I'm not sure. You know what? I shouldn't be practicing here. We're gonna move on from this. The Goatman still hasn't been seen as much in recent years, and I sincerely hope that he's still out there. Number 3, Qualpalic. The Qualpalic, or the Qualipiluit, is an indigenous cryptid, with most stories emanating from Nunavut, Canada, and Alaska in the United States. The Qualpalic is described as appearing vaguely humanoid, but having scaly and bumpy skin, and long, stringy, disgusting black hair. They are described as being disgustingly ugly and that they reek of sulfur, and I think it's worth noting that you cannot find a single artist's depiction of these things that don't make them just look like vomitatiously gross. Interestingly, the creature is predominantly described as being a female monster, although some local variations of the stories exist where it is described as a male creature, but most tales revolving it describe it as a lady monster. The Qualpalic is a bit of an icy boogeyman, snatching up children who misbehave, waiting around thin ice to crack up and drag those children down into freezing cold water. It's thought that the origin of this creature was first told as a story for practical purposes, as a pretty good way to get kids to not walk on thin ice is to tell them that they'll be grabbed by a gross ice demon. Allegedly, when they grab a child, they stuff them inside their leather burlap sacks, then scurry back downwards into the water. It's said that you can hear a knocking under the ice as a last warning that they're about to strike. Now maybe this is just a personal experience I had, and maybe some of you also had this as a little kid, but I was read a children's book called A Promise is a Promise, a Robert Munsch classic, that featured a Qualpalic as a villain that was trying to get a little girl to bring her younger siblings to the Qualpalic as a little snack, and it terrified me so much. I didn't even live anywhere near thin ice and I was scared about it. It scared me bad. Wiry black hair and sunken little eyes got me. Maybe it's not relatable at all, but I thought I would share that. I definitely didn't spend any time near thin ice afterwards. Number 2, the Jersey Devil. The Jersey Devil is a fairly popular cryptid and has been subject to all sorts of sightings and stories since the early 1700s. And I bet you can't guess where it usually shows up. That's right. California. Nope, New Jersey. The Jersey Devil is commonly described as manifesting itself as a chimeric creature with a horse's head, bat wings, a snake-like tail, and hooves. There's an interesting folktale that says that the Jersey Devil was brought into our world when a woman was stressed out over her 13th pregnancy. Good lord, yeah, I would be too at my 13th pregnancy. Okay. She was nervous because apparently this pregnancy felt different, and I guess if she had 12 others, she'd really know. She said that she felt like the baby that was inside her was the devil. When she was ready to deliver her little newborn, instead of a happy little baby, the Jersey Devil was born, flew out into the night, and then spent the next 250 years terrorizing the New Jersey swampland. The creature is deeply rooted in local folklore, and to be honest, it's kind of beloved around Jersey. It serves as the name for the New Jersey Devils, and it worms its way into all sorts of pop culture, games, movies, movies, TV, music, they love them over there. For years, there have been stories and sightings around New Jersey describing a kangaroo-like creature with glowing red eyes hunting on small animals in the surrounding areas, and lots of blurry photos of bizarre hybrid-looking creatures running around the countryside. There have even been hunts and bounties posted for the Jersey Devil with rewards for its capture. So is the Jersey Devil real, or just a beloved local legend? Number 1. The Hat Man. Rounding off our list is our most recent cryptid on this list, and a piece of modern folklore that is already making a lasting legacy. The Hat Man is a shadow person, or at least thought to be. Everyone who's seen the Hat Man has described almost the same thing exactly, most concerningly. A spindly, shadowy figure that appears to be wearing a hat. Sometimes a fedora, sometimes a top hat, but everyone describes him as wearing an old, out-of-date style, so you're not going to see him in a shadowy snapback anytime soon. He always appears fairly towering, and you can't see his face. It's obscured, or just not present, and the only thing you're truly able to make out are his pinprick red eyes poking out of the shadows watching you. Depending on who you ask based on the sightings, the Hat Man can be considered somewhat benign. Maybe. It's usually reported that the Hat Man appears to people who are suffering from sleep paralysis or insomnia, and most claims of Hat Man describe him as just watching, observing, studying, or whatever. I honestly don't know if that's better than it attacking you. However, it's not all just stories of nighttime stalking. There are some who claim that when they've been visited by the Hat Man, that he's jumped them or choked them, or they felt burning sensations on their scalps or their chest. Although some say he's just watching you for I don't want to know why. There are many who believe that he feeds off your negative emotions, and perhaps this is how he satiates himself. It's said that people who are visited by Hat Man are those who are already struggling with something emotionally resonating. Sometimes people in the same family even report seeing the Hat Man in similar occurrences, so does he target specific groups of people? Or is it just certain emotions he hungers for? The Hat Man is shrouded in mystery, and even just thinking about him is enough to make my hair stand on end and start eyeing the coat rack in my room just a little suspiciously when I turn the lights off. Number 5. Menangle. Starting off of our list of horrifying cryptids that would have the devil chucking underneath his bed is the Menangle, a demonic vampire spirit of the Philippines. Now, there is a good chance that I am horribly mispronouncing that name. My Tagalog ain't quite what it used to be. Just being a big vampire creature would be enough to earn a spot on this list, but the Menangle doesn't settle for just the bare minimum. Oh, no. This creep turns it up all the way. Listen to me describe this monster and tell me that it wouldn't be out of place in Elden Ring attacking you in the horrible wastes of Caelid. The Menangle is a humanoid bat creature hybrid. And a quick aside, while I was doing some research for this video, I found it really interesting that nearly every culture has their own variation of a humanoid bat cryptid. There's the Ahul in Indonesia, Kongamato in some African regions, and Bruce Wayne in North America. The Menangle has giant leathery bat wings, which it uses to sweep through the night, grabbing its prey and fleeing off. And we haven't even started talking about the Menangle's namesake and action feature. Its name comes from the Tagalog word tangle, which means to separate, with its full name roughly translating to one who separates itself. Well, whatever does that mean? Well, it's because this nightmare creature can split itself in half, taking to the skies as a disembodied torso with flapping bat wings screeching around. Can you even imagine how soul-stoppingly scary it would be to see a giant bat monster flying around with like its entrails just hanging out for everybody to see, hanging loose like an old man in a gym shower? Its favorite prey is couples, young newlyweds in love, and also people who are sleeping. No respect from this thing. You shouldn't attack sleeping lovers. If you're hearing this and you're locking your doors, a Menangle is said to be thwarted by garlic. Now, garlic will thwart it, but not slay it. I'm just glad I eat so much garlic, and I'm very repugnant, and I'm gonna be alone for the rest of my life, so I have no danger of Menangles. Now, if you want loads more cryptid content, we have got enough to fill up a zoo worth of the creepiest critters ever to crawl through the woods. Not your jam? We got aliens, monsters, movies, true crime, fake crime, and a lot of videos about a big shark. There's a little something to scare everybody. So hit that bell, stay subscribed, and stay scared. And please stay watching this video. I worked hard finding all these cryptids for you. Number 4. Jotagumo. One of you delightful little ghouls in a previous video left a comment suggesting this one for me, and I thank you so much for putting me on the trail of this cryptid. I wouldn't have heard about it before, so shout out to the Phantom Spectator for this one. The Jotagumo is a monster of Japanese folklore that's kind of like a succubus, but with a bit more of an arachnid twist. I can't say the name of what Jotagumo translates to and stay within YouTube guidelines, but just know that it is extremely funny. I will give you a hint. Oldest profession spider. Ask your parents. Jotagumo is considered a yokai, basically a Japanese demon. It's a powerful shapeshifter, maintaining the form of a beautiful young woman to seduce its prey and able to transform into a vicious spider to finish the job off. What's she like to eat? Well, she has more acquired tastes than flies and grasshoppers. The Jotagumo likes young, handsome men who are lonely and looking for love. When in her humanoid form, she'll seduce them, invite them back to her lair, and well, you can probably guess how it goes. The folklore behind Jotagumo is fascinating. In Edo period Japan, spiders were considered to be mythical creatures with alien abilities, which, I mean, come on, totally reasonable. And it was said that the older a spider gets, the more powerful and potent its abilities would become, kind of like a wizard. A Jotagumo is a spider that's lived for hundreds of years to be able to shapeshift, and she doesn't even look a day over 25, not bad. An old folktale tells the story of a woodcutter who fell in love with a woman he met at a waterfall. He visited her every day but grew weaker with each visit. A priest accompanied him one day, and when a spider thread reached out to the woodcutter, the priest yelled, warning the woodcutter that the woman he loved was a dreaded Jotagumo. Already ensnared by her spell, he persisted and ran towards the waterfall, where he was entangled in the web and never seen again. Number 3. The Beast of Exmoor. Whoa! With a name like the Beast of Exmoor, this thing's gotta be good, right? The Beast of Exmoor sounds like something you and a party of adventurers would set out to slay to restore peace and balance to Eternia. So what is the mighty Beast of Exmoor? Well, it's in Exmoor in the UK, which is a real place and not a fantasy castle, where it gets its name, and locals tell the story of a gigantic elusive cat. In the 80s, there were all sorts of stories and sightings of a massive cat being described as similar to a puma or a panther being spotted around the Exmoor area. A farmer around the area claimed that he had lost over 100 sheep in his care, and all of them lost in strange, unnervingly violent ways. Injuries that looked like a feral creature had mauled them. Skin peeled back, skulls crushed, throats cut. This grew the notoriety of the elusive creature, and where all these sightings come from. People would claim that they'd see this huge beast like a black leopard stalking the plains. In fact, it was theorized for a while that it was possible that the Beast of Exmoor was a cougar or another big cat that had been owned by some sort of exotic collector, not naming any particular reality TV big cat owners, that had either gotten loose or let out into the wild to roam free, wreaking absolute havoc on an otherwise sleepy countryside. The problem got so bad that the Daily Express, which admittedly is a gossip rag, offered a cash reward for anyone who could bring the body of the Beast of Exmoor. Unfortunately, Geralt of Rivia was preoccupied, so no one was able to take this deal up. In 2006, a Devon farmer noticed the bones of a puma on his estate, which is odd, as there are very few pumas roaming the British countryside. There's cougars, yes, there's a lot of cougars in Great Britain and the UK, but I wouldn't consider Catherine Zeta-Jones a threat. So was the bones found the remnants of the Beast of Exmoor, or does this elusive cryptid still stalk the night, attacking sheep? The frustrating thing about hunting a cat cryptid is there's no way it's gonna come when you call it. Best thing you can do is put out a big cardboard box and hope that it'll jump inside that, because it's a cat. Number 2, Goatman. Okay, some of these cryptids have been a little grounded, realistic animals that got loose or whatever. I'm over that. We need one on this list that's just completely out there in every regard, supernatural and wild. So let's discuss the nastiest kid in Maryland, the Goatman. Now, he might look a bit like Mr. Tumnus, beloved childhood character, but he is not taking you anywhere as nice as Narnia anytime soon, and he sure as heck don't got no Turkish delight for you. He manifests as a half-human, half-goat, a satyr of sorts, and sightings and descriptions describe him as having a goat's head and the body of a man. The legend of the Goatman started down in Maryland, and is primarily where most of his legends come from, but he's also been sighted around Louisiana and Texas as well. We love a Goatman that's well-traveled. Goats have been figures in myths and folklore for generations, with goats thought to be associated with Satan and demons, but the Goatman himself is all Maryland. Depending on who's telling the story, he's just a supernatural entity that wanders the woods, or maybe he's a former goat farmer who became deranged after losing one too many goats and he's a madman in a costume. If that origin leaves a little bit to be desired, he's also got a fantastic comic book bad guy origin story where he's the product of a science experiment gone wrong to, I don't know, merge a man with a goat, I guess. Anyway, he breaks out of the lab Stranger Things style and creeps through the woods, hatchet in hand, attacking passersby dare disturb his territory with an axe. The Goatman was a fairly popular campfire story and urban legend through the 70s and 80s amongst teenagers, where the creature was said to haunt Lover's Lane, looking for canoodlers where he'd split up the action with a sharp axe like he's Jason Voorhees with a set of horns. For any of my Maryland viewers, shout out for me. Is Goatman still a big deal? Do the kids still tell stories about him? I love this guy, so I am curious. Number 1, the Hat Man. Now, a lot of these entries and stories and cryptids have been told for generations over and over, so I think it's only fitting that I get with the times a little bit and we start talking about a modern cryptid. The Hat Man is the most recently talked about cryptid on this list, if you can call it that. Is cryptid the right word for a shadow person? I don't know, but it's my list, and if anyone wants to correct me, the Hat Man is welcome to come down to the studio. Interestingly, almost everyone who reports seeing this mysterious Hat Man describes it almost exactly the same way. A spindly, tall, shadowy figure that is wearing a hat, hence the name. Some people see a top hat, some see an old, like, newsman's fedora. Everyone says his attire is out of date by a century or two, so no new era fitted on this guy. You can't see his face at all, just shadows, and the only thing you can make out are his dead, pinprick eyes, shining red in contrast to the darkness of the rest of his physique. And he is watching you. Now, what does the Hat Man do besides checking in on you at night? People who report seeing him appear to be people who are suffering from sleep paralysis or insomnia, and most sightings and reports describe him as being benign, if not terrifying. Watching you, studying you, what have you. There are some, however, who claim that he's not just a visitor and he's a little more sinister than that. Some people tell stories of getting an appearance from the Hat Man and feeling choked or burning sensations on their scalps or chest, or just feeling like a general overwhelming terror and nausea, which I think is totally reasonable if there was a shadow demon in the corner of my room watching me. Now, some people who've seen him claim that he feeds off your emotions, and that the people who are visited by the Hat Man are those who are already struggling with something like great stress or mental illness, which is probably definitely not made better by a shadow demon. Sometimes people in the same family claim that they can see him. So what's he doing? Is he targeting specific people, or is it certain emotions that he hungers about? Thinking about him already is enough to make my hair stand on end and squint at the coat rack in my room when I turn the lights off. I think I'm gonna sleep with just the lights on tonight, just to like be safe and make sure my cats don't bump into anything or anything. Number 5, Mothman. We had to start with a classic. He was either gonna be number 5 or number 1, and I figured we'd get him out of the way first. He's maybe one of the most universally recognized and classic cryptids out there. He's West Virginia's unofficial mascot, and he's as beloved as the Appalachians and buckwheat pancakes. You've probably heard of Mothman a bunch before, but do you know his backstory? You know where his legends and his legacies start? Unless you're a West Virginia native, maybe not, so let's shed some light on the Mothman, because he would probably love that. You know, he's a moth, he's drawn to it. Most Mothman fans agree that his first reported sighting was in the 1960s, 1966 to be exact. The story goes that a young couple, one Roger and Linda Scarberry, had been driving around at night when they saw a large creature whose eyes were glowing red, standing at the side of the road near the site of an old World War II munitions plant. Linda described this being 7 foot tall, muscular, with giant wings and nightmarish glowing red eyes. Upon being illuminated, the creature pursued them all the way to Point Pleasant. Now, one isolated sighting does not make a cryptid legend, so it was probably the repeated sightings that propelled our favorite moth into legend status. For the next few weeks, Virginians kept reporting sightings of a bizarre, large, bird-like creature with glowing red eyes. On December 15th, 1967, the Silver Bridge in West Virginia collapsed, with several locals conspiring that the Mothman was involved, and could be seen flying away from the crime scene. I always thought he was benevolent, just like a fun, I don't know, guy. I didn't know he did stuff like that. This is unwelcome news. Maybe it's just because we all like the idea of him so much. He does look weirdly cuddly, but Mothman is an absolutely beloved figure to West Virginia and cryptid fans all over. He's kind of larger than life, and it's easy to forget that the first initial sightings and reports of him was that he was a paranormal threat intent on harming humans, considering just how adorable he is now. He's got movies, stuffed toys, and even a festival in his hometown dedicated to celebrating our favorite freak. And if you're looking for more stories of freaks of nature, or the nature of freaks, stories too good to be true and stories too true to be good, well, we've got all of that and then some on Top 5 Scary. Click through, I guarantee you'll find something you like, and then subscribe and stay scared if you do. But hey, keep watching this video first, because we got way more cryptids to get through before we hit the credits. Let's keep going. Number 4, the Rougarou. Oh, that is so fun to say. Say that at home with me around. Rougarou. Oh, rolls off the tongue. Our next entry takes us deep into the swamps of Louisiana. Deep beneath the brush of the bayou, amidst all the flies, crawfish, toads, and gators, lies something sinister in the sunshiny Pelican State. Alright, I'll knock that off. I won't do that for the rest of the video. I won't torture you. The Rougarou is a centuries-old cryptid, a more Cajun answer to the werewolf. The name rougarou actually is a direct link from the French word for werewolf, loup-garou, shifting over time. If you L to an R if you can hear it there, I don't know. My accent's not great. The history of the rougarou can vary greatly, with differing legends and conflicting fables telling different stories of the beast's origins or motives, but it can all be traced all the way back to medieval France. Back in those days, a lot could go wrong. Lost crops, your livestock goes missing, your children go missing, your house burns down, all your investments in cryptocurrency go up in smoke and all your apes get stolen. Any number of terrible things could happen to a French medieval peasant. And when that would happen, instead of cursing out or lashing out at the sky, you would blame the rougarou for your troubles. It's very easy to pin all your problems on an imaginary werewolf. I do that all the time. I stub my toe, I curse out a werewolf. Villages would capture people who they believed to be acting strangely, or even sometimes just somebody who lived out in the woods, and pin all the blame on the village's problems on them for being a werewolf. So unfair the discrimination werewolves receive. This tradition of blaming an invisible werewolf for your problems led to the rougarou becoming a fixture in legends passed down from French Catholics, mostly about behaving. Stories would be told of how if you didn't behave, you didn't follow your parents' rules, the rougarou would come and he'd snatch you from your bed in the middle of the night and carry you off in the woods. Or sometimes he's like a very Catholic monster. If you didn't adhere to the rules of Lent every year, your sinful ways would see you transforming into a rougarou. So it's a Catholic werewolf born out of naughty behavior instead of being bit by one. How exactly someone like transforms into a rougarou is not made super clear, like if it only happens on full moons or if it's a one and done kind of thing and then you're a furry for life. All that's known is that the rougarou is a deadly creature of the night, stalking the swamps, giving pause to travelers who dare explore the bayou late at night. But hey, so long as you mind your P's and Q's and you promise to give up whatever you said you would for Lent, you and the rougarou should be headed in different directions. Hopefully. Number 3, skinwalkers. This one is a very popular cryptid online, and you've probably heard a great deal about them before if you're a fan of this kind of thing. But the term does kind of get thrown around a lot and ends up describing all sorts of things that might not be super accurate. So let's take a look at examining some of the history of the legend and where it stems from. Skinwalkers are apparently like really viral on TikTok. I wouldn't know, I gotta be honest, I try to really limit how much time I'm on that. The Skinwalker is a creature of Navajo legend where it's referred to as a Yi Naldushi, and please forgive me if that's pronounced incorrectly. It translates to, by means of it, it goes on all fours, referring to their tendency to walk like an animal. Navajo witches and skinwalkers go against traditional Navajo values and are seen as the antithesis of their core beliefs. As well, it's worth adding, legends of skinwalkers and Navajo witches are not particularly well known or well told outside of indigenous communities, and some indigenous advocates and groups are not the biggest fan of their folklore and cultural history being made into fodder for ghost stories. Animals commonly associated with skinwalkers are coyotes, wolves, foxes, eagles, owls, or crows, but skinwalkers are said to be able to have the power to assume the form of any animal they see fit. Now, a variation of the legend surrounding the creature is that they're able to extend this ability to taking the face of a human victim, which is extremely scary. Some legends say that skinwalkers gain power from a victim's fear and that they prey on those who are afraid. And some state that looking into the eyes of one will cause your body to seize up, overtaken by the fear, where it will then attack you. On TikTok, as I've come to understand from some very intensive research and definitely not just goofing off at my desk watching TikToks of cats falling down on my phone, is that skinwalkers are popularly thought to be a creature imitating humans or animals and doing a poor job of it. Which case, if that is true, the likelihood of me being a skinwalker? Sky high. Number 2, Mongolian deathworm. Our next entry is a cryptid whose name really says it all. If you ever hear something get described as a Mongolian deathworm, you have to figure that is probably not the friendliest form of life out there. For starters, it sounds like it would be way more at home in the dunes of Arrakis than it would be on our Earth. That one's for my Frank Herbert heads out there. The creature is also called Ogoi Korkoi, which translates to large intestine worm, which is, that's just lovely. Appetizing. It allegedly lives in the Gobi Desert, has been evading hunters since the 20s when it first rose to prominence. A paleontologist and author going by the name of Roy Chapman Andrew recounted a story he'd heard at a gathering with several Mongolian officials, where they all talked of the worm at great length. Now, no one among them could claim to have actually seen it, but everyone firmly believed in its existence. In this book, he describes the worm as being about 2 feet long, with no head or limbs to speak of, and has such poisonous skin that direct contact is enough to have you buying the farm. It's described as well as having a sprayable venom and an electric discharge. You should probably see a doctor for that. It burrows underground, only coming up to the surface to hunt and eat, presumably. In 1990, Czechoslovakian cryptozoologist, and wow, that's a mouthful, Ivan Mackerel led a team to try and find the creature in the Gobi Desert. This I love so much because Dune is my favorite book. They use the same technique that the Fremen of Arrakis use to try and find these worms that the Fremen used to deal with the sandworms. They used a rhythmic thumping made from a motor-driven thumper to try and summon the creature out of possible hiding spots. They never found the fabled worm, and that's because they weren't taking spice, so they couldn't see properly. So either it was just a dream, or the thing is very, very good at hiding. And I think with a little work, that could make a fun expression. Oh, it's as hard as trying to find a worm in a desert. We'll workshop it. Number 1, Gashadokuro. And our final entry is gonna come from Japan, and as a fabled mythological creature, and may I just say, is one of my favorite mythical monsters I've read about in a while. As soon as I was reading about this thing, I started texting my friends. I was so excited about it. This thing is a real-life Dark Souls boss fight. Maybe I'm outing myself as way too much of a nerd here, but this thing is where the inspiration for High Lord Wolnir and Grave Lord Nito of Dark Souls fame came from. I couldn't resist throwing it out there. Sorry, guys. Formed from tens of thousands of bones of fallen soldiers, the Gashadokuro is a massive titan of a beast, a gigantic skyscraper-sized skeleton. Is that not the coolest thing you've ever heard? A giant which wanders around the countryside during the darkest hours of the night. Their teeth chatter and their bones rattle, which is why the translation for their name translates loosely to rattling skull. You'd have to imagine though, you would probably hear this thing chattering its teeth from a few hundred miles away. You'd hear it in the next town over. It's said that the Gashadokuro is born when mass amounts of soldiers die on the same battlefield. Their bodies rot in the fields, and they don't receive proper funerary rites. As such, their souls are filled with torment as their bodies lay face down in the muck, and that malice permeates their bones, causing them to twist and mend into unnatural ways, clumping together to eventually form the humongous skeletal monster of a boss fight, the Gashadokuro. Now, troublesome for humans, it's said that a Gashadokuro is too large and too powerful to be felled by ordinary weapons. Although, I have to wonder if that's still true. I feel like we put more gunpowder in things in 2023 than they did in the Sengoku period, and I'm pretty sure a bulldozer would make short work of a bunch of bones being held together with hatred. It's said that these creatures no longer show up because the amount of dead bodies in one place are not nearly as high as they once were in rural areas of Japan back then, with significantly less wars and plagues occurring, which is a sign of progress, right? You know, if there's so few piles of mass graves that they're no longer reanimating as Godzilla-sized skeleton demons, that's a real positive note for the human race, and I think something we can all smile about. Number 5, some strange noises. One of the creature's signature calling cards is said to be its horrific wails, its pained shrieks that don't sound like any animal you'd recognize. It's also said that it's been able to imitate human voices to better lure out its prey. And perhaps those disconcerting sounds were caught on tape as recently as 2019, when a series of howls and shrieks left a hunter and a government biologist searching for answers as to what was going on in those woods. Gino Mikas was hunting with his wife and grandson in northwest Ontario in a fairly remote rural area, about 50 kilometers away from the nearest sign of civilization, most likely an en route. Sorry, rest of the world, that joke is just for Ontario. It's a Canadian cryptid, what can I say? At first, I thought it was a moose, but my mind changed when it screamed again and again. Mikas is an avid hunter, a resident of Sioux Lookout, and knows his way around the woods and what creatures should be living in it. He added on saying, "I've heard many different animals in the wild, but nothing like this. I grew up hunting with my grandfather for the first 12 years of my life. The howls initially came from the distance, but soon appeared closer." We've got the clip, so why don't you take a listen for yourself and see what you think. Now, some speculated that it could be a grizzly bear. However, there's not a lot of evidence for that since grizzlies don't really live in these surrounding areas. They are known to roam, but there's not reports of grizzly bears nearby. Others speculated that it could be a wolf, which definitely is possible, but you would think that an expert seasoned hunter would recognize a wolf. So, there's a number of people who speculate that this could be the mythical Wendigo caught on tape. And if you're looking for way more stories of folklore, creatures, cryptids, well, you already know what channel I'm gonna recommend. It's the one you're watching right now. We've got tons and tons of scary lists just waiting for you to discover. So hit that subscribe button, please make sure to hit that bell so you don't miss a single scream and get all caught up. But Do that at the end of this video if you wouldn't mind. I got way more Wendigo sightings coming up for you. Number 4, Southern Ontario sighting. Our next story also comes to us from my home province of Ontario. Makes a lot of sense. It's where a number of regional myths revolving around the Wendigo all originally stem from. Now this one comes to us from an anonymous Redditor who posted to the Skinwalker subreddit detailing a strange encounter that they had, possibly with the creature. You take a listen to this. I decided to take my dog out for a walk this afternoon and not put my headphones in. As we were walking along, I heard a voice calling out my name in a sing-songy way. I stopped and looked around and I called for my dog to come back to me, and he stopped where he was and stared at me for a while and then eventually came to me. I didn't acknowledge it. I walked around a little more and still didn't see anything. Now, I live with my parents, and my mom knows that stories about skinwalkers freak me out. A few days ago, we were having a bonfire, and she hid and tried to call for me in a scary voice to freak me out, so I assumed this was the same thing happening. I continued walking and I heard, "Come over here," and I was so freaked out because this sounded like it was my voice saying it, and I heard this so much more clearly, like it was coming from inside my head. I have no idea what was out there this afternoon, but I can tell you for certain I will never walk out there without my headphones on again. Can honestly say this was the weirdest experience of my life. Now, if you believe the legends and folklore, if you hear the creature calling out for you, the only correct thing to do is to ignore its attempts to lure you away. You don't want to go toe to toe with this thing. You're not going to stand a chance. So it sounds like the original poster in this situation, even though they were scared out of their wits, still made the right decision and got off with just a scare and a story instead of something much, much worse.
Number 3, Wendigo as a metaphor. Beyond viewing the Wendigo as a literal monster or as a boogeyman created to prevent people from eating each other in desperate times, some people view the Wendigo as a metaphor for greed and its all-consuming nature, helping to reinforce the communal values that let members of a tribe live well together in their environments. Interestingly, native scholars have used this metaphor in modern contexts to great effect. For example, in his 1978 book Columbus and Other Cannibals, The Wendigo Disease of Exploitation, Imperialism, and Terrorism, Dr. Jack D. Forbes uses the Wendigo as a metaphor for the attitudes and behaviors of domination and exploitation enacted on his people. As he writes, "I have come to the conclusion that imperialism and exploitation are forms of cannibalism, and, in fact, are precisely those forms of it which are most diabolical or evil," going on to say that the treatment of minorities clearly attests to the fact that, quote, "the wealthy and exploitative literally consume the lives of those they exploit." This really shows how effective this legend is as a metaphor for greed, working just as well in a tribal setting to prevent people from hoarding what little food was available as it does in a modern setting where imperialism's need to make others suffer for the benefit of a ruling class is explored. So, from a metaphorical standpoint, the Wendigo is undeniably real. We just call it capitalism. Number 2, Wendigo psychosis. Whether the Wendigo is real or not, there are documented examples of people going mad and engaging in Wendigo-like behavior. People who crave a more scientific explanation coined the term Wendigo psychosis to explain this behavior. The term is controversial, but has been applied to instances in the past as a means of explanation. For example, in the 1661 Jesuit Relations, which were published progress reports by Jesuit missionaries, reported about an incident that was believed to be the result of Wendigo possession, but has later been labeled as Wendigo psychosis. Here is the translated quote. "What caused us greater concern was the news that met us upon entering the lake, namely, that the men deputed by our conductor for the purpose of summoning the nations to the North Sea and assigning them a rendezvous, were there to await our coming, had met their death the previous winter in a very strange manner. Those poor men, according to the report given to us, were seized with an ailment unknown to us, but not very unusual among the people we were seeking. They were afflicted with neither lunacy, hypochondria, nor frenzy, but have a combination of all these species of disease, which causes them a more than canine hunger. This makes them so ravenous for human flesh that they pounce upon women, children, and even upon men like veritable werewolves, and devour them voraciously, without being able to appease or glut their appetite, ever seeking fresh prey, and the more they consumed, the more greedily they ate. This ailment attacked our deputies, and as death is the sole remedy among these simple people for checking such acts of murder, they were slain in order to stay the course of their madness. Another strange case was a Plains Cree trapper named Swift Runner in Alberta, who was starving with his family in 1879 when his oldest son died. He consumed him, but went on to end the lives of and eat his 6 remaining family members. This was attributed to Wendigo psychosis due to the fact that he was only 25 miles away from a Hudson's Bay Company post, which had emergency food supplies, showing that his actions were not a last-ditch effort to avoid starvation, but a horrific and crazed act. This real behavior reinforced the belief in the Wendigo. But I promised I would tie this all back to the government, and I will. The Canadian government. Number 1. Real Wendigo hunters. This entry focuses more on the belief that the Wendigo is a spirit who possesses people rather than causes them to turn into a giant monster. This belief has caused a few situations where people attributed violent acts to possession by the Wendigo spirit, or in other cases took the lives of people thinking that they were possessed and that their death was the only way to prevent the dangers of the Wendigo from taking innocent lives. An infamous case was the story of Jack Fiddler, the chief and shaman of the Sucker Dudum among the Anishinaabe in the northwest Ontario. He was renowned among his people for his ability to defeat Wendigos, having claimed to have defeated 14 of them during his life. He said that some of them had been sent by enemy shamans and some were afflicted members of his own band. In these cases, many of the afflicted's family members, or oftentimes the afflicted themselves, would request that Fiddler euthanize them according to their people's rites before they turned Wendigo. Fiddler resisted efforts to have his people convert to Christianity, making them some of the only indigenous people left in North America who were living traditionally with very little government interference in their legal or religious matters. In 1907, 2 members of the Northwest Mounted Police heard about Jack Fiddler and his Wendigo fighting and decided that this was a perfect opportunity to introduce Canadian law to the North. They arrested Jack and his brother Joe for murder, keeping them in captivity while awaiting trial. Canadian newspapers picked up and sensationalized the story, saying that it involved devil worship, and people across the country demanded a conviction, while the police investigating the issue viewed it as an opportunity for fame and advancement. Jack Fiddler escaped and took his own life, and his brother was charged despite testimony showing that the deaths had been euthanization of very ill people in an effort to protect their tribe, and that they were ignorant of Canadian law. He was sentenced to death, although further appeals secured his release. Unfortunately, the release order came 3 days after he had died. Without their leaders, Jack's people were forced to accept government rule and signed Treaty No. 5. Oddly enough, the government has not been very open about the fact that they sentenced 2 men to death in an effort to assert their power and dominance, and to bring fame and notoriety to their agents. See, I told you I'd bring it back to the government.
Coming in at number 5, I have the Wendigo from Borderlands 3. Borderlands 3 is the 4th installment of the main series Borderlands games and was released in 2019. The release was a success and the game met a lot of people's lofty expectations. The game is a first-person shooter game where you play as a vault hunter. There's a plethora of different quests and missions in this game, and as I'm sure you're all expecting, one of them is centered around a Wendigo. The Wendigo boss is found during a mission called Horror in the Woods. Yeah. Horror in the Woods, guys. It's safe to say the makers of this game know that this creature is freaking scary. You find this Wendigo in a deep, creepy looking cave. The Wendigo in this game is fast and extremely talented at climbing because oftentimes it will scale the walls of the cave on all fours. It has classic antlers jutting from its head and will often charge at the player. What's different than other adaptations of the Wendigo though, is that this thing can literally spit fire. As if scaling walls and being super fast and strong wasn't enough, the game makers decided to give this Wendigo the ability to breathe fire at you. That, on top of the fact that it's extremely hard to kill, has a skull for a face, and what looks to be muscle tendons for its body is what puts it on this list. I have it down here at number 5 though, because the graphics of Borderlands 3 aren't particularly scary, but it definitely deserves a nod. At number 4, we have the Wendigo from the video game Outriders. This is a third-person video game released earlier this year on most platforms. The premise of this game is that climate change has gotten to a place of no return, and the people of Earth have decided that they need to find another planet or they're going to die. Wow, that just got real very quickly. The player in this game takes on the role of an Outrider who is an elite soldier tasked with being sent to this new planet that the human race wants to settle on. When they're there, they find a plethora of enemies, and sure enough, one of them is a Wendigo. This game doesn't have multiple Wendigos, it only has one. And let me tell you, it looks messed the heck up. It's got like bone things jutting from its back in unnatural, unsettling directions, and it's this one disgusting slit on its face that is either its eye or its mouth. I'm not even sure, it could be both. For hands, well, it doesn't really have hands actually. Instead of those, it has one massive sword-like weapon thing jutting from its right side, and then 3 more tiny claws coming out of its left side. Basically, this adaptation of a Wendigo is a freaking nightmare, and it has evolved to an advanced killing predator machine. In the game, this thing is also a boss, and super hard for the player to kill. For starters, I obviously don't want to get eaten, but if I'm gonna get eaten, can we just make it from a normal mouth, please? Not some slit thing that might also double as an eyeball. It's gonna be a hard pass from this guy.